She will go to Vise Dothrak and eat the heart of a horse in front of the crones. I know no more. Go away. He scrambled back toward his house, raising dust around him. Arthur took several brass and copper coins out and tossed them on the ground. Thank you for helping us find our missing princess. She's a Khaleesi now. She'll have blood riders of her own. She won't want to go back to your world. He stood, pressing himself to the side of his mud house. Then I will wish her well and offer a marriage gift, Jon said, although he refused to believe that Dany would want to stay in this land. Braavos and Qohor had been powerful cities with strong walls, but out in this Dothraki sea of grass, all he had seen was poverty and starvation. He walked away with Arthur, both of them getting on their horses. They had both started riding mounts taken from the Dothraki who had died attacking them. The horses were strong and tireless, unlike many of those they brought from Pentos where they'd started. They had left the rest of the men on the other side of a rise, and that's where they rode now. Do you know where Vise Dothrak is? Jon asked. Arthur agreed. It's the ruling center for the Dothraki, and we are unlikely to be able to get to the princess while she is there. But we can ride in that direction. You call her a princess now? Arthur looked over. She is one. You and Oswell called her Lady Daenerys before, and Laena said she introduced her as Lady Daenerys of Dragonstone when she met with people of the city. But now you call her a princess. Why? Arthur was silent for a time. Does this have anything to do with why my father wants me to take the throne but Uncle Ned doesn't? Your Uncle Ned cares for your happiness, but he ignores that you have obligations, just as he does as Lord Stark. Arthur made a disagreeable face, but then Jon had known from a young age that Arthur and his uncle were not friends. And what obligations do I have? Am I obligated to sit on an ugly chair? Am I obligated to lead an army and force people to kneel to me? Arthur reined in his horse. Your Grace, he said slowly, look at these people. I see them, Jon said. There is nothing I can do to save them from poverty. Agreed, Arthur said. These people are what happens when each part of the continent cares only for itself. These people could band together to defend themselves from the Dothraki, but the moment they come together in any numbers, the slavers attack because they see only a large number of potential slaves ready to be claimed. The Dothraki are not a significant threat unless they can assemble an enormous horde, but they can do that because the slaver cities hire away anyone strong enough to stand against them. There are no lords protecting the lands, so the small folk suffer. I could declare myself king of Essos, but I think I would have a rather short reign, Jon said. Arthur smiled at his joke. True, Your Grace. However, people of Westeros are no different. When the Baratheon reign fails, and it will, each kingdom will begin to raid the neighbors. The strongest will carve out their domain and then begin to feast on the small folk beyond their borders. Maybe those who have year-round use for labor will start to slave again. Mayhaps some lords will establish the right of first night again. Imagine what Walder Free would do if he had no liege lord or king to answer to. All that might be true, but Jon was only a man, and not one raised for the throne the way Prince Joffrey had been. If I put myself forward, there will be war. There will be war either way, Lannister against Baratheon. The war will be worse if I try to put forward a claim, Jon countered. The war will be terrible with or without you pressing your claim. We must look to the peace that will follow to judge the worthiness of the cause. And how will putting me on the throne make a better peace? Jon honestly didn't understand this. If Robert's children were not legitimate, then the law supported Stannis as Robert's heir. Or perhaps Robert could legitimize a bastard. He had enough. He might even have more children later in life, true-born heirs that could take the throne. Arthur started riding toward the hill where the rest of their party waited. The thumping of horses' hooves created a soothing rhythm and dust drifted around them in soft swirls. Before the Seven Kingdoms were conquered, they were seen as savages. Essos had better technology, better medicine, better everything. Even the Citadel was a shadow of the current institution. Westeros dismissed those who attended as Paramour's pets, not men of great ability seeking to advance the realm. I know the history. You tutored me well. If Lannister wins the war, no other kingdom will bend the knee. They could conquer the Reach and hold them through force, but the other 5 kingdoms will have the strength to defy them. The North would stand alone, Jon agreed. And that would be terrible, Arthur said. After the Targaryens conquered the Seven Kingdoms, they no longer focused all their might on defending their borders. The Hightowers invested in the citadel, turning it into a great center of learning. The Tully developed river-driven machines. The Westerlands found new ways to mine and refine metals. The Reach doubled the productivity of their fields. Dorne built water gardens in the middle of the desert and bred the finest horses in the realm. You think they wouldn't have accomplished any of this without being unified? They couldn't have. Each kingdom has great resources, but they are too vulnerable to attacks from their neighbors to care about anything other than protecting their castles. And now that roads and bridges connect the Seven Kingdoms, that vulnerability is even greater. Even the north is more at risk with a road through the neck and long coasts that can be invaded by boat. Westeros would turn into another Essos with large sectors becoming a wasteland of poverty and brigands willing to feast on suffering. This could be the Riverlands in 100 years. Jon didn't want to hear this. This was not his responsibility. His uncle always said that the law of conquest superseded the law of succession. The Baratheons would likely win the war. The realm is held together now by a Baratheon. Joffrey will unite no one. Arthur spat in the dirt. Stannis is a man who has alienated most of his small folk and rejected the gods old and new in favor of a red god who calls for men to be burned alive. He allowed his wife to burn the September and the Seven. The realm would set him on fire if he tried to take the throne, and Renly knows it. If the lords and small folk turn to Renly, then he will be king. Arthur shook his head. Stannis will not abide that insult. For all his faults, Stannis is a capable leader who understands the movement of men on a battlefield and how to win a war. Renly does not. Even if Renly can put 10 times the men on the field, I would expect Stannis to win the battle. Tywin Lannister will make sure brother turns against brother so he can win the war. And then we are back to the other kingdoms refusing to bend the knee to a Lannister. Fear has made him a mighty lord, but that same fear will drive others to stand against him. Can the Baratheons not work together until Lannister is defeated? Perhaps you can advise them. Stannis believes in honor. He will not make an alliance with the intention of breaking it later. However, if he knows the truth of the rebellion and realizes that you exist, he may see you as the legitimate heir. His honor will make him bend the knee if he believes you are the rightful heir. Renly will bend the knee if he sees what I see. There is literally not another man who the whole realm could accept. The realm will not accept me, Jon said. They will. Arthur sounded supremely confident. Even Robert took the throne in part because he was the next male with Targaryen blood and because the lords know the danger of splitting into separate kingdoms. The Valyrians never cared to conquer Westeros, but there are now warlords with the might to accomplish what the Valyrians never bothered to do. If Dorne has no one to call on, if Deosh decides to invade, or the Riverlands are abandoned when a warlord out of Braavos lands, then we are lost. If Westeros is that vulnerable, why didn't the Valyrians conquer us as they did much of Essos? Your sire wondered that often. He had a theory. In stories of the first men, it was known that some could enter the minds of animals. The more closely an animal was bound to humans, the more easily the person could enter their minds. Wargs, Jon said softly. He swallowed as he thought of his own dreams. He would sometimes feel hunger, even when his own stomach was full. Once he stood in the dark of night, looking down at Castle Lyanna and feeling such bone-deep loneliness for his pack that Jon's chest hurt. He had sent all his love to Ghost, stretching himself toward the strange feeling of having left his body, and for a second, he was Ghost. His tail wagged. He experienced their reunion before he slipped away and woke in his body. He couldn't dismiss these as random dreams. Not anymore. He was a warg, but the stories were so terrible, stories of men who lost their humanity, who became monsters. He was not ready to admit the truth, not even to Arthur. He would wait until they were home and talk to his father. Arthur didn't notice Jon's discomfort. Yes. Wargs. The legend says that they could enter ravens or horses or dogs more easily than wolves or eagles or mammoths. Animals that knew the touch of man would allow a warg into their mind. And dragons are bound to men. Exactly. Your sire believed the Valyrians feared the blood of the first men because of the type of magic they wielded. But he also believed that only a child with magic of both Valyria and first men could fight some growing danger. The Song of Ice and Fire. Jon hated that phrase. His mother had thrown her life away, knowing she would die in childbirth, because she believed in the song. Arthur saw that as proof of her strength, and even Uncle Ned had buried her with the warriors of the Stark line, among stern-faced men with swords on their laps. But Jon could not ignore that she and Jon's father had plunged the realm into war because of their song. And yet, like Arthur always told him, prophecy was a fickle thing that could not be trusted. Prince Rhaegar believed that the doom was caused by magic from the Bloodstone Emperor, a man who took the throne by betraying and killing his sister, the Amethyst Empress. Her death started the long night Jon finished. So the legend says. Rhaegar believed that the long night or something like it would come again, that the Emperor or some malevolent part of his magic remained in the world and caused many disasters, the long night, the doom of Valyria, evil faced by the Lion of the Night. Jon knew all this, but he didn't believe he had to sit on the throne to face the evil, assuming that the evil appeared in his lifetime. Prince Rhaegar had believed he would see the long night, and he'd been wrong. So many Targaryens who relied on prophecy and visions had failed. They had set themselves on fire. They'd blown themselves up. They'd died in righteous indignation, but that did not make them any less dead. They rode in silence until they reached the top of the hill. Below, men were cooking over fires and training and pairs kept guard on the perimeter. Arthur spoke, his voice low. The realm needs you to take the throne. If Westeros breaks into separate kingdoms, fathers will not send sons to the citadel because they need commanders who can lead armies on the field. Tully water wheels will be burned by their enemies. Reach fields will be put to the flames as armies try to starve each other. Small folks in the Westerlands and Riverlands will be raped and killed. Without fear of being hunted by a larger force, the mountain clans of the Vale will turn the area into a battleground between the descendants of the First Men and the followers of the Seven. Progress will stop. Small folk will suffer. Kingdoms will fall. Those from Westeros will always see me as a bastard. Show them you're a Targaryen, Arthur advised before reaching over and slapping the rear of Jon's horse, sending him down the slope first. Chapter 12. Chapter text. Daenerys shifted in the saddle, struggling to find a way to ease the discomfort. Is all well, Khaleesi? Irai asked. I am well. This little stallion just insists on kicking. She rested her hand on the swell of her stomach. She would give birth soon, and as much as she still felt uncomfortable with the Dothraki, she yearned to hold a son with her blood. Then she would not be the only dragon in the Khalasar. Sometimes she thought of Sir Oswell and Viserys and the others in their household, but they were not coming, and she had to let go of the past. If she didn't, she would end up like her brother with his obsession to regain their ancestral throne. She was a Khaleesi now. She would ride with the Khalasar, but at least now she had her own servants and blood riders. Aggo, Jago, Rhaenyra, Irai and Jiki were all hers much more than Drogo's. She wasn't powerless. Have you chosen a name for the babe, Khaleesi? Jiki asked. Jaehaerys, Dany said. After my grandfather. Was he a powerful Khal? Irai asked. No, Dany said. No, he was not supposed to be the king the Khal. But when needed to take power, he did, and he led well. He ended the Blackfyre rebellion. But what I really admire is that he refused to be told what to do and who to marry when his father was king. He found a way to create the life he wanted and to marry the woman he desired, Dany said. She was sure that the Dothraki heard her and assumed she meant that she had married the man she wanted. She hadn't, although she did respect that Drogo was far better than most of the Dothraki. He had allowed her to hide in their tent while he mounted her until Hidichi had explained that important events were supposed to take place under the sky. The first time she had led him out into the night to couple under the stars, he had touched her with reverence. On days like that, she could see the goodness in his heart. He would whisper promises in the night and his hands ghosted over her flesh, always respectful and careful. But then he would ride out with his KO and he would watch as his men killed and raped. He was a great man who had been poisoned by his culture, which taught him that anyone who didn't have strength didn't deserve protection. He didn't see the Lamb people, as he called them, as even people. They were no more than livestock to be rounded up and sold to the slave cities. Not that the Dothraki would admit to selling anything. No, they gave the slaves away, and Drogo had been gifting slaves to Meereen in hopes to gain ships enough for his Khalasar. It is a good name, if strange, Jiki said. He will appear soon and the Khal will feast you as the greatest of the Khaleesi. Dany's smile was strained. She hoped the feast would be out here in the Grass Sea because the slaver cities horrified her. Riding through Meereen made her ill as she watched children locked into irons and slaves beaten like beasts. Worse, some of those who suffered did so because Khal Drogo had stolen them from their homes. The Lamb people should have fled, but the only escape was north, and the Dothraki treated them as vermin to be exterminated. That might be kinder than the life they suffered in the slave cities. But Dany suspected their child's feast would take place in the Great Pyramids of the Cursed City. Her child kicked again, and Dany arched her back and hissed in pain. "Khaleesi!" Irai called. She was at Dany's side, immediately, holding her arm so Dany didn't fall from her horse. Dany waved her away. She was not so weak that she would fall. "They are normal pains," she said. She would be happy when the Khalasar stopped again. She wanted off her silver horse. Horse's hooves thundered, and Drogo charged toward them. "Moon of my life," Drogo said as he pulled his horse to a halt at her side. She smiled. "My sun and stars," she said, "I am fine. You should be at the front of your Khalasar. The stallion who mounts the world will be born soon. I will stop the Khalasar when time for your battle comes." Dany smiled and rested a hand on Drogo's arm. "The time for battle is not yet," she promised him. The handmaiden who had checked her the previous night said the babe had not yet turned for birth. He simply enjoyed kicking his mother. He took after his uncle Viserys. "We will camp soon. I will take riders out." Dany swallowed. She had argued so hard that they should stop hurting people, raping, enslaving, killing. However, these men didn't understand her objections. Hidichi explained that the great stallion in the sky they worshipped had no understanding of such objections. The stallion ran until he found a mare and mounted her, and this was normal. The horse killed and did not mourn. They claimed it was the same for men. Dany's blood riders had decided to forego rape in favor of having sons with Dothraki women, but those were 3 men who had chosen to ride at her side in this life and the next. Even they did not understand her moral objection to rape, they simply honored their bond with her. "By the time our son has his first kill, we will have a united Khalasar behind us," Drogo promised. "The other Khals will fall before my blade," Drogo promised her. "Just as the moon shines over the Grass Sea, so shall you shine over all Dothraki." He whirled his horse around and rode toward the front of the Khalasar again. Irai sighed like a girl pining after a night at a tournament. However, Dany feared that he was too confident. Her brother Rhaegar had ridden into battle so sure of himself that he had left 3 Kingsguard behind, and the Baratheon bastard had crushed his chest. Sometimes Dany dreamed of it, terrible dreams where stags impaled her brother, throwing his body up into the air, and then towers rose from the ground, blue roses pushing between the stones until the tower fell. Sometimes dragons came after that, and sometimes wolves, but they would scatter when a huge black shadow would cross the sky. A dragon black as coal would come out of the sky. Then Dany would wake. A horn sounded the end of the march, and Dany sagged in the saddle. Her back ached, and she yearned for one of Irai's back rubs, but she had to show strength until she was safely inside her tent. Irai helped her off while Jiki turned toward the supply wagons. "I will warm water for you," Irai said, pulling out a single ground cover before hurrying out. Dany lay on the single rough blanket on the ground. Irai and Jiki would put out more luxurious furs later, but Dany had stopped needing such luxuries. Just being off her horse was pleasure enough. The pressure on her back made her roll to the side in search of a comfortable position. Right now she would do anything to start the battle, as the Dothraki called it. Birth pains could not be worse than the slow torture of pregnancy. The camp noises around her soothed her into a twilight where she hovered on the edge of sleep. She rubbed her hand over her belly and thought about what sort of man Jaehaerys would be. She didn't want him to be Dothraki. She never wanted to think of her sweet son pinning a woman down. No. She would raise him to understand that being physically stronger didn't make a person better. Laena always told her that. Dany's mother had been smarter and kinder, but her father had respected neither, and after Duskendale, her father's cruelty had grown unforgivable. Sometimes when the cruelty of the Dothraki bothered Dany too much, she reminded herself that her own father had burned a man to death for trying to protect his son. People in Westeros wore more clothing and learned reading and writing, neither of which were of any use to Dothraki, but they were not significantly different. If anything, her position with the Dothraki was better than it would be in most of Westeros. If Khal Drogo died, she would be protected by any Dothraki who knew she was a Khaleesi. She would be escorted back to Vys Dothrak, and as a free Khaleesi, not a womb wife, she would rule on the Council of Crones. She would be as revered as statues of the mother set in their niches in septs. Nothing in Westeros would give her as much status or respect. Men might join the Black Brothers at the Wall or the Maestas or the Gold Cloaks or Kingsguard, but the only status a woman was allowed was as wife or in the Silent Sisters, where a woman had literally no voice or authority. She certainly wouldn't have hordes of warriors obligated to listen to her word. Jiki pushed open the flap. Khaleesi. Come. Another Khalasar approaches. What? Dany struggled to rise, feeling like a fish dropped on shore. Jiki had to pull her to her feet. Who is it? Khal Drogo. Do we know him? Dany asked as they hurried out of the tent. The Khalasar was on edge, women darting from place to place and the men keeping a hand on their blades. In the distance, slaves cried. Dany shivered. Normally the sounds of camp hid the crying of babes that Drogo planned to gift to the slavers in return for ships. At this point, Dany hoped her child was a girl. The world did not deserve to get mounted by a Dothraki chosen one, and she did not want to see her son become such a monster. But naming him Jaehaerys could not turn him into her grandfather, who had focused more on protecting people than subjugating them. His son, Kalaka Fogo, was in the procession in Vys Dothrak when your son was proclaimed the promised stallion who mounts the world. I know his Khalasar travels this part of the sea, but nothing else. Will this be a peaceful meeting? Dany whispered. Jiki gave her an incredulous look. Ago hurried over, his hand on his arrow. Khaleesi, will you watch Yokel or wait in your tent? Dany straightened. I will watch Michael, she said firmly. Why do the two Khalasars meet? She asked him. As a blood rider, he was charged to only tell her the truth. Khal Drogo says we hunt on his grounds. He says his son Fogo is as likely to be the stallion that mounts the world as your child. Dany refrained from wincing. Drogo would challenge him for those words, assuming Drogo hadn't already challenged him. Yokel is mighty, Khaleesi, Ago said. Bad luck can tip the scales in battle, Dany countered. Ago grinned at her. The great stallion favors the Khal. He will be the greatest Khal until your son unites all the tribes. He had such faith, but Dany's stomach twisted as she walked toward the front of the Khalasar. After Khal Drogo falls, his Kalaka will challenge. He will fall to Yokel or one of the KO if Khal Drogo denies him the privilege of giving him a Khal's death. Drogo's blood riders will attack to avenge the blood of their blood, and Khal Drogo's blood riders will dispatch them. After that, most of the KO will bend the knee to your husband. Others may fight for either status or revenge. You must stay close to me while the blood runs hot. Dany nodded. She had no interest in getting caught in a fight. Jago and Rhaenyra were already near the Khal, and Ago escorted her to their side. Drogo smiled at her before turning his attention to Drogo. My moon will give birth to the stallion. You and your Kalaka will yield or die, he said confidently. I will drive you from the fields where my Khalasar hunts. Drogo drew his blade. The fight was brutal and fast. Dany tried to stand tall and calm, but she retreated behind Ago as their wide swipes of the blade cut through tents and bystanders alike. Drogo slipped on the grass, and Dany sucked in a horrified breath as Drogo's blade came down. The shallow cut took a chunk of his chest, including his left nipple. Drogo raised his blade and screamed in triumph, and Drogo drove his own blade into Drogo's exposed stomach. Drogo's Khalasar gave an undulating cry as their Khal stumbled back, his hands going to his stomach. The blood horrified Dany. But she watched as Khal Drogo sank to his knees. Drogo stood and with one swing removed Drogo's head. It thumped to the ground, and then Drogo's blood riders surged forward. Drogo's own blood riders rushed to find an enemy to sink a blade into. The scene appeared to be chaos, but it was as Ago had described it. After several minutes, all Drogo's blood riders were dead, free to follow their Khal to the Shadowlands. Drogo's heir and a half-dozen of his KO were dispatched, and the fight was over. Khal Drogo's Khalasar had just grown by thousands. Dany hurried to Khal Drogo's side, fear stealing her breath. If he died when she was pregnant and helpless, what would happen to her? They were far from Vise Duthrak and she had only 3 blood riders. "You are wounded," she said, staring at the wound with horror. His left nipple was gone and the bloody flesh dangled like a piece of a gutted fish. "It is a mere scratch, moon of my life," Drogo said. "It is not." He caught Dany's face in his large hands. "This is no more than the bite of a fly. This cut is only a new scar. When our son is born, I will boast of this fight so he will carry tales of his father's greatness with him." Dany swallowed. She knew from her lessons with Laena that more men fell to the corruption that set into a wound than from any loss of blood. If she had some of the blood powder from the north in West Eos, she could dress this wound, but she didn't know what to do to help. "I will search the Khalasar for one skilled with healing," she said. Aggo hissed in disapproval, and even Khal Drogo's expression hardened. Dany felt a fear she had not since early in their relationship. But she was a free Khaleesi. She had status equal to her husband, and she should not fear him as her mother feared her father. "I need no man's help. I am no man, although I am a free Dothraki. I offer my arm freely." Drogo laughed. "You are not the blood of my blood. You are a Khaleesi who will rule with the crones after I am gone. Do not offer your arm, moon of my life." He walked away, and Dany looked to Aggo in confusion. "To offer an injured Khal your arm, he could accept that as a request to be his blood rider," Aggo said, "but you must be the mother to the stallion who mounts the world and a crone to rule at Vise Duthrak, even after your great Khal has joined the ranks of the great stallion's Khalasar. Your Khal is strong." "All will be well," Aggo promised, but Dany didn't feel as confident. She remembered a dream she had. A great bird sank his beak into Drogo's chest and plucked out his heart before being hit with an arrow that felled it. Drogo and the bird both sank to the ground. Small dragons had risen from the pool of blood, only to burn alive and give birth to larger dragons. Then the great black dragon with green eyes soared in the sky overhead. Chapter 13. Chapter text. "My lord," a sharp voice woke Ned from his sleep. He groped for his sword before he could recognize Jory's voice. "What's happened?" He swung his legs off the bed and reached for his laced shirt. "We received a raven from Bear Island. A crown ship comes with all sails up." Ned paused as he pulled his breeches. "A crown ship? Mage Mormont reports it sails the king's banner." "Mage? Any raven from Bear Island should have come from Jorah." Ned stood and reached for his sword before he stopped. He saw how fate struggled to return to its old path. Daenerys had been taken by her horse lord. His sister had died. Cersei had birthed bastards, even without her brother in the Red Keep. Fate marched toward war. Ned fought at every step, but the North was not ready to stand against the crown. Not yet. And he would not have Ice lost a second time. He took the sword and handed it to Jory. "I will write a missive for Robb and for him alone. You will not allow any other to see it. You will take Ice and the missive back to Winterfell as soon as I have finished writing. Choose a dozen men to ride hard." "My lord!" Jory cried. "I will hear nothing against my orders," Ned said firmly. "The North must be protected at all costs." "But you are Warden of the North. My place is at your side, protecting you, my lord." Jory spoke with such passion that it brought back the memory of seeing Jory die for him. Ned refused to allow fate to force him on that path. "Your place is following my orders," Ned said coldly. "I am the Warden of the North, descended from the Kings of Winter, and that means I carry the burden of protecting the North. If I fall, that burden passes to Robb, and you will be there with Ice. I will hear nothing against that order." Jory sucked in a breath. "Do you fear the crown?" Ned sighed. "I have for many years," Ned confessed. "There are whispers of a coming war, Westerlands against Crown lands. I have ordered Robb to take Northmen south only for a grand council." "We have a king," Jory said, confusion etched on his face. "What need have we for a council?" Ned pulled his breeches on and buckled his belt. For the last many months, he had carried Ice at his side at all times, painfully aware of how close to the wall they were. The others were there. Waiting. Having Valyrian steel at his side had soothed the nightmares, but if he was in the Red Keep, he had no need of it. "I fear we will not have our king for long," Ned said. Powerful men want power, and Robert stands in their path. People plot treason. Jory's hand fell to his sword as Ned pulled on his boots. Ned had been the same in his last life. He had seen danger and run toward it with sword or royal proclamation in hand, certain he could win any battle. He'd been a fool then, and Jory was now if he thought his sword could save Robert or stop the realm from tipping into war. Ned sighed. Maybe, he said. I know not, but I have heard whispers and I will have my heir free from the machinations of the court. Do not allow Umber and all his anger or Cat with her desire to help me or Benjen with his fear for his brother to convince Robb to stir from Winterfell. The hardest winter in living memory is upon us, and I will not have anyone move away from their preparations. Jory's face had turned from confused to alarms. My lord, I shall go with you. You will not, Ned said firmly. If I am called south, I will go alone. You will be of no use to me in King's Landing where the enemies come with poisonous words instead of clean swords. You will, on the other hand, be of great service to Robb. Make sure the Grand Tour continues and stonemasons repair the wall and the keeps we have scheduled, and search for dragon glass. If all else fails, have Robb negotiate with Stannis to import from Dragonstone, but do not let him grow suspicious or he will increase the fees. Yes, my lord. Jory's fingers were curled into tight fists. Ned buckled his scabbard, resting his hand on the lesser sword he had brought for this purpose. He took a deep breath. Some things should not be committed to paper. Jory, if there come enemies that resist other weapons, dragon glass and Valyrian steel will prove effective. He looked at Ned with unvarnished concern. What enemy would resist cold steel? Mammoths. Ned shook his head. Just remember what I have said. If I do not return north in time, that message must reach Robb. And tell him that I had considered speaking to a master smith about reforging ice into 2 bastard swords. They would be better for close combat. But the only smith I know who is capable of such work is in King's Landing and I did not want to go south. If I am called south, I will try to send him north. Reforge your ancestral sword. Jory sounded horrified. Northmen are too practical to value a weapon's symbolism over its effectiveness in war. A great sword as large as ice is a symbol to be used in executions. In close combat, 2 swords would better serve their wielders. Promise me you will deliver that message. I will, Jory promised. Ned nodded and checked all his buckles. Good. Now I must write a letter and you must prepare to ride hard. I want you gone before the ship docks. Jory nodded in a quick bow before leaving. He had lit a candle, but Ned pulled out the lamp made with purified whale oil and lit it. He ordered most of the oil preserved for winter, but he would enjoy this little luxury while he wrote to his son. He hoped that this time he had not poisoned Robb with tales of overblown honor. He hoped his son was ready to stand on his own and make practical choices for the realm. There were few reasons for the crown to send a ship north, and none were good. Ned just wished he knew which variety of trouble had found him. Hours later, Ned stood on the deck with Eric and a dozen of his guard and more servants, all ready to greet the great warship that glided past the hidden defences at the mouth of Whale Song's harbour. The flag had the black stag and crown of House Baratheon, but Ned doubted Robert would be aboard. Still, he wished Eric would return to his work. If he refused to bow and blood would spill on the docks, and Ned was unsure what would happen after that. The crew guided the ship to the dock and Whale Song workers quickly caught the lines that would tie the ship. Too soon, the plank dropped, and people began to disembark. Guards appeared first, dressed in the black and bronze of House Royce. The Lord Hand had come. While not as bad of a portent as if Robert had appeared, it was still dire. When Jon appeared with his balding head crowned by white hair, Ned bowed. Most of those on the docks bowed even lower, a few going to their knees. Welcome to Whale Song. I would have prepared a feast had I known you were coming. Ned kept his smile in place, even when he saw Jorah Mormont and his Lannister wife in her lace and petticoats. Ned. It is good to see you, although I should be cross for recommending me for this office. Ned's smile was more genuine now. I apologize, Lord Hand, but the North has been neglected for too long and I could not spare the time to do the task well. I trusted you to keep the kingdom and coffers well in hand. Keep the king in hand, you mean, Jon said. For a Vale man, he was plain spoken. When Ned did not respond, He continued, I'm sure you're curious about the reason for my visit. Immensely, Ned said. With a hand, he invited Yon to walk with him down the dock. Lord Royce, may I introduce Eric Nitrana, who speaks for the Free Folk of Whale Song. Free Folk? Yon frowned, either at the unfamiliar title or the lack of any bow or courtesies from Eric. As Hand, Yon was the second most powerful person in the Seven Kingdoms, and while he could forgive a lack of kneeling, Eric had made no effort to even lower his head. I believe you would call my people wildlings, Eric said. Ned controlled an urge to groan. Wildlings? South of the wall? Yon's alarm was clear. Some wildlings, those with professions and families, have come south to work whale song and tail-end, Ned said. The North lacks strong men and women more than any other resource. Yon glanced over toward Jorah. Either he hadn't known where people came from or he had not shared the truth with the crown. The former would make him stupid, but the latter made no sense. If he had brought the crown here, why would he not share any damning detail he could? Jorah. I had not thought to see you back. Ned kept his voice calm despite having an overwhelming urge to beat his disloyal bannerman. Jorah could give loyalty to no one other than a woman, and even then, the man confused loyalty and lust. Ned had little respect for him. Lord Stark, Jorah said, bowing his head. Lyone raised her chin and looked anywhere but at Ned. Why would he not come? Is this not the closest northern city to Bear Island? Yon looked from one to the other with a calculating gaze. He was a clever man, more than Ned ever had been. He could smell political machinations better than most. Sir Jorah has the same problem I had as a young man, a Southron wife who has little respect for the old gods. She was told that only those who held true to the faith of the first men should visit the godswood, and Jorah took himself and his wife away to protest the disrespect that showed his Lannister bride. Yon's eyebrows rose. How interesting. Jorah glanced toward his wife. Ned had not required that hint to know that Lyone had been the architect of whatever plot was underfoot. Jorah was loyal and would give his life for whatever woman he chose as the holder of his heart, but he was not a man to plot. And Robert would not stir or send good men to seek Ned unless he had been forced by politics or circumstances. Ned believed he still had enough of Robert's affection to say that. Eric snorted. All you Southerners speak too much and watch too little. Why are you here and what do you want to see? Yon blinked in surprise and then turned to Ned. You have found people even more plain-speaking than your Northmen. Eric spoke before Ned could. None of them are of the true North. Unless the snow melts in summer, they don't know how to feed themselves. I am here only because I hope to stop you from saying anything stupid to my people or my people from being particularly stupid around you. Choose where you would walk so I do not waste more time. Yon's guards shifted uncomfortably, and Yon again looked to Ned. They are not my bannermen, Ned explained. They share a portion of the whale harvest to help us prepare for winter and send more to the wall, which has suffered a century of neglect, but they do not answer to me. Yet they live on your land. We have mutual interests, Eric said, and when our interests no longer align, we will take our families back to the true North. Ned sighed. It was just as likely that Eric's people would overstay their welcome even after the long night ended, and Ned's grandchildren or great-grandchildren would fight to either evict the free folk or force them to kneel, but for now they both did what they needed to do if they hoped to save their families. As the Warden of the North, I chose to allow them to move here. The decision is within the scope of my office. True, Yon said. I suppose it is not much different than trying to reason with a number. It is not, Ned agreed. Eric, I can show the Lord Hand around the city while you return to your people. Eric stared at Ned for an uncomfortably long time. But if you require assistance, you need only call. Either Jory had spoken to the man or he had his own spying on Ned. Either was possible, although he believed the second more likely. Jory might have protested leaving Ned, but he was a leal man. Ned had told him to spare no effort to reach Winterfell, and he would do nothing less. Eric walked away, and Yon watched with an amused expression. I had expected my first introduction to wildlings to be more wild. They are people, no different than you or I. Yet they have not sworn to you, and you do not require it of them. They take nothing that was not free for the taking. I offer no support, send no supplies, and get a portion of their hunt for my minimal efforts. Minimal efforts. Jon made a production out of looking at the towers that stood on the sides of the gates. Most of the enormous stone pile had been turned into carved rock and added to the towers. Each held stairs for defenders to climb, arrow slots, overhangs for boiling oil and a host of other defensive structures. All but the final touches were done, and they were impressive structures. The free folk did most of this work. I have stonemasons teaching some of them, but they also have masons among their number. A man of great talent is carving the stone of the combined chancery and market. He has a talent equal to anyone found in King's Landing. How unexpected. Jon kept his expression neutral, studying the city as they walked the cobbled road down the center of the valley. Ned wondered if he was as in awe of whale song as Ned. He had never considered it possible to build a city that did not stink. Even White Harbor had its dark alleys and off scents. And it was loud. But here the city was spread over the valley instead of having all the houses crowded together for safety. These people did not fear death or cold, and they refused to hide from either. That and their need to never waste an ounce of any resource made the city cleaner than any in all of Westeros. Ned led them to the white government building. The second story was now complete, and the rooms were as expansive and illogical as the first floor, but at least the half-built third floor had smaller spaces and more logically placed fireplaces. Ned would need to send for a maester soon. When Ned had first planned Whale Song, he had hoped to make Bran Lord, but he did not want his sons this close to the wall. Not even the son he couldn't claim in this life. Jon, like the others, was a warg, and Ned feared that meant he had some hint of green sight. True, in his last life, Jon had never lost himself while north of the wall, but that might have been because he was so stubborn. Ned would not put him at risk. But if Jon took Castle Lionel and Brandon took Moat Caitlin, Benjen could claim Whale Song. Beautiful, Jon said when he saw the massive carved whale rising out of a storm-swollen sea. The artist would be paid more in King's Landing. He would, considering I don't pay him at all, Ned agreed. He walked into the government building. One side was set up for meetings or court and the other had smaller offices. Jon lost his equanimity. You do not pay him. Free folk barter and they do not own more than they can carry or pack on their animals. When they have reached that limit, they will do tasks for the community. He chose where and what subject to carve. And you have no say, in your own lands. At one point, Ned might have bridled at the disrespect, but his time in the Black Cells had taught him that a lord was nothing more than a man. In his first life, he had held honor above all, and he had still traded it in an effort to save his daughters. He had few illusions left, even before the gods intervened in his death. I do not seek to control free folk. They are more unruly than numbers, and I try to avoid giving them orders, either. Jon stopped his guards at the door. Hold here and keep others out. Yes, my lord, the oldest said. Ned was grateful that Jorah and his Lannister wife were left outside. There is a good view from the top, Ned offered. An excellent suggestion. Ned climbed the stairs, explaining all the ways the first 2 floors were illogical for people concerned with surviving winter and how the building was a well-constructed insult to the stupidity of people who valued pomp and status. That led to more reasons why the free folk thought all of Westeros were lackwits. They call us what? Jon asked as they reached the 3rd floor. We do kneel, so the term is not without any basis, Ned said with some humor. And you invite these men into your borders. The brothers on the wall have starved in recent decades. There are so few that they cannot keep the wildlings out, so it is best that I set the terms for their welcome. I can have workers who are free to set up their communities in one valley, or I can have raiders climbing the wall from one sea to the other. Is it so bad? Ned said. But these people are also good folks. Look what they have built. Ned stepped out, the winds catching his hair as he looked down the length of the valley. The clustered houses in their different colored mudding looked like jewels half buried in the bank of a river. Everywhere were berry bushes and small gardens and children running along paths. It was a well-run city, without needing a city watch or cells. Of course, Ned knew how many men had been executed by their own tribesmen for breaking the peace, and more had returned north of the wall when the obligation to abstain from horrors such as cannibalism became too much, but for the most part, the city thrived. Lyanna Lannister wrote her former lord, asking for a reward for reporting a warden who had betrayed his oaths, Jon said. Ned ran a hand over his face. Surely Robert knows I would not be an oath-breaker. Robert has too many Lannisters at court, Jon said bluntly, and Jorah Mormont does nothing to rein in his wife. He did not even speak for you when he sailed to King's Landing with that poisonous cunt he married. Jorah has always been more loyal to the women he loves than the lords he has served, Ned said, knowing that was a harsh condemnation that would follow Jorah to his last days. Jon had the ear of many lords, and he had never feared speaking his mind when he held no respect for someone. I noticed. What are the specific charges? Jon shook his head. I know not. The small council insisted that someone must take you word that you are urgently needed in King's Landing. They feared you would ignore a raven. If it had the king's seal, I would not, Ned said. However, I am touring my lands and many smaller keeps require reinforcing. I cannot stop the work of being a warden to answer spurious charges from a discontented wife. Discontented wives are the bane of this kingdom, Jon said darkly. That was rather ominous. Ned did hope Bronze Jon would not lose his head the way Ned had. It had been a terrible time that he would not wish on another man of honor. But he also trusted Jon to understand the politics of the situation better than Ned had. I promise you, Jon said, that you can bring as many guards and weapons as you would like. I will leave my own people here if there is not room enough on the ship. I hate that I have been sent to fetch you, and I will offer you every liberty and honor I am free to offer. I appreciate that, Ned said, but my people are needed here. What I require is 2 days to review the plans with my workers and ensure they know what is needed. I need to write letters and send riders since there is no Ravenry here yet, and I must brief my guards for how to handle any difficulties they may encounter. If I do not travel with them, some of my more difficult bannermen, such as Bolton, may question their right to inspect. I need to alter the schedule so they visit the Dread Fort last, hopefully after I have returned. I can give you that time. I shall walk this new city of yours so I can report on what I see. You have no hints on what Lyonne Mormont might have told the council? None, Jon said. King Robert, Queen Cersei, Lord Tywine, and Varys were in chambers with the Mormonts. I only know that Cersei gleefully told the others that if the accusations were not true, Jorah would have spoken for his lord, yet he remained silent on the matter of your defense. Tywine is in King's Landing? Ned demanded, ignoring the disloyalty of Jorah Mormont. After all, he had expected that. He had not thought Tywine would enter the game so early. For a fortnight before the Mormonts arrived. Why? Ned asked. Tywine has never forgiven me or Robert for the death of his monster, Clegane. And Robert resents the Lannister influence on his court. Jon raised his eyebrows. You are well informed for someone who avoids King's Landing. Ned stared at the city he had helped build and struggled for the right words. I was there when King's Landing fell. I saw Jaime Lannister mad with grief over what his father's men did, so mad he lunged at Tywine, sword in hand. I saw Tywine's fury when Robert ruled that Clegane would face justice. Those are the sorts of resentments that do not fade over time. Yet Tywine is in King's Landing again. Bring guards, Lord Stark. The city is not safe. And no guards will keep me safe. I must show Robert that I am true to my oaths and trust his justice to get me home again, Ned said. Fate might seek his head again, but this time he would not lead anyone else to their deaths, no Jory or Septa Mordane or Vayan Poole dying in his name. No guards who were barely grown men bleeding out on the streets. No maids with their tarred heads on pikes right next to his. Ned had become adept at fighting fate, and he would again. However, if history insisted on repeating itself, this time he would walk to his death alone and not drag more innocents with him to the gallows. I hope this is a decision you can live with, Jon said. As do I, Ned confessed. He had already died once, but he found he was no less terrified facing it for a second time. Chapter 14. Chapter text. Arthur lowered the Moorish glass. Hackle has fallen from his horse. If he doesn't die of that wound, his own lieutenants will murder him. Jon grimaced. How can anyone live in a culture where people are not given the chance to recover? Jon asked. As far as he was concerned, tending the wounded was the primary difference between humans and animals, and yet these Dothraki would rather emulate animals. This will be our opportunity, Arthur said. Whoever gains control of the Khalasar will take most of the horde with them, leaving your aunt with her blood riders who will be charged with escorting her to Viz Dothrak. That's when we will attack. Jon had never been so grateful for another man's injury. His only regret was either he or Arthur had never been given the chance to gut the monster who had taken Daenerys. It had been nearly a year of following this Khalasar from north to south, from near Ibni's territory to all the way down to the slaver cities. And the whole time, they could not get near Daenerys. They had been forced to watch from a distance, to abandon their supply wagons and hide their presence, to stalk from high ground as she grew large with child. Jon was near homicidal even thinking about the indignities his aunt had suffered. Laena had said something before they had parted ways, something about how Targaryen women seemed fated to suffer. As unhappy as it made Jon, he had to admit she was right. His grandmother had been repeatedly raped by her own husband. His mother had been dishonored by his father and impregnated all to serve prophecy. And now Daenerys suffered in a Dothraki camp. How long do you think it will take for the Khalasar to break apart? Jon asked. Our contacts were either inconsistent in their answers or they claim there is no set amount of time that the Khalasar mourn before the lieutenants fight for control. Arthur's disgust made it clear that he was equally appalled by Dothraki culture. These people claimed to follow a horse god, but they were neither as useful or as benign as a horse. Jon did not know of any animal that acted with the cruelty of the Dothraki. That was a uniquely human trait. I need to tell the men to be ready to move at a moment's notice, Arthur said. It's possible the horde will split into many pieces. It will be hard to avoid the notice of too many separate Khalasars. Should we retreat for now? We could ambush her blood riders as they passed us on the way to the city, Jon suggested. Arthur shook his head. It's too dangerous. Their culture says that Khaleesi are to be respected and protected, but that does not mean that each individual will have the same beliefs. It's entirely possible that once the horde breaks into pieces, one of the men might decide that she is beautiful enough to take. That risk increases when we consider the prophecy. Another man might think to have their own son be the stallion that mounted the world. Jon grimaced. His aunt had suffered enough. She didn't deserve to have men treating her like a tool of prophecy. It was hard enough when Jon thought about his own mother, but at least she had chosen to give her life. He could even understand why. The Stark words were winter is coming, and the family existed to make sure that the world of men would survive another winter. All the North were dedicated to the same. Umber and Bolton and Karstark had accepted wildlings into their keeps because they believed it necessary to have more fighting men if they wished to survive another winter. Whalesong existed because his uncle believed that it would help the North survive another winter. The Starks sent second and third sons to be commanders at the Wall because they believed it would help the North survive another winter. He was not surprised that his mother, upon seeing what she believed to be evidence of a prophecy, would choose to sacrifice everything to ensure that the North survived a long night. But Dany had not chosen this. She had been taken against her will, and Jon would never forgive the Dothraki who had done it. So many men of the North thought the wildlings were savages because men and women would steal each other as part of their courtship, but no man would steal an unwilling woman. Tormund and the others would tell stories, laughing at the painful death by poison that men would suffer if they dared. If the woman did not end the man, her kin would slaughter him and all his children. But these Dothraki took slaves and raped women, which was unforgivable. By the gods, Arthur muttered, 2 of Drogo's lieutenants are fighting. Has he even died yet? Jon asked. They've had no funeral pyre, so I assume not. They have no respect for fallen leaders. They have not even sent him with the proper rituals, and they must act like dogs biting each other to steal the meat. Jon's own Targaryen father had been heaped together with all the loyalists and camp followers who had died at the Trident, and their bodies had all been burned. Rhaegar would never be laid to rest with his family. It seemed unfair that a man like Khal Drogo would get an honorable pyre when Rhaegar had been burned like trash and his ashes lost. Maybe if the Khalasar descended into chaos, Khal Drogo's body would be left to rot in the sun. Eventually Arthur blew out a breath. One of them has prevailed, he said. He is riding amongst the warriors. Trying to convince all of them to follow him, Jon guessed. Does it seem to be working? I think Daenerys' guard might be challenging for the Khalasar, Arthur said. Jon frowned. What would that mean? He was desperate for a Moorish glass of his own, but Arthur could evaluate what he could see much more effectively. He had the experience to understand what he saw. Arthur lowered the glass. If they are blood of her blood, then if one of them wins a challenge, that might give her control of the khalasar. But widows go to V's Dothrak, John said. Arthur lifted the glass to his eye again. Are we absolutely certain they have to? John didn't have an answer. They stood in silence for a time before Arthur said, Daenerys Guard has won the challenge, but that seems to have made the rest of the Dothraki angry. Ride back to the men and have them pack. We may have to move fast. John turned and ran down the hill until he reached his horse. A year of following the horde and he had learned to ride as well as any Dothraki. He leapt into the saddle of a great roan beast bred by the Dothraki. It could run for days without stopping, but John kept it to a quick trot as he closed in on the small camp. They didn't even dare light a fire and they lived on hardtack soaked in water and jerky that made their teeth ache from how much they had to chew. Clee was on sentry, and he stepped out of the shadow of a scraggly tree as John rode up. Pack and be ready to move, John said. Khal Drogo? Clee asked. He's not even dead and his lieutenants are killing each other. Daenerys Guard has already fought one battle and Arthur wants us ready to move, so saddle the horses. I'll get the others, Clee said. Over the previous year, they had all learned to eat and even sleep in the saddle. If we can reach Princess Daenerys, where will we take her? Tollus, John said. The men knew to gather at the small boats they had hidden along the shore to the west if they were separated, but up until now, John and Arthur had kept their final destination a secret. However, John had seen enough of battle and blood to know that he and Arthur might both fall. He had seen great swordsmen laid low by gopher holes and an incomparable archer killed by a fragment of an arrow that was flung into the air when it shattered under Sir Arthur's sword. No matter how much they trained, they lost men, and John needed to make sure that his aunt would be safe if he and Arthur were lost. Tell all the men. Make sure they can remember to seek out Sir Oswell, who has secured a manor on the Street of Palms in Tollus. If we are separated, get Princess Daenerys to Sir Oswell at all costs. Clee frowned. Your Grace, we cannot leave you. I will have Sir Arthur. You know he won't leave my side. That silenced Clee. Yes, Your Grace. He turned and headed into camp, rousing the others as he passed them. Malto stopped to study John before he picked up his bow. Of the 60 men they'd started with, Malto and Clee were 2 of the 13 who remained. The others had disappeared in the night, or they had fallen prey to illness, or they'd been lost in skirmish after skirmish with the small groups that would break off from the main khalasar. Even relying on archers as they did, a year of encounters had chipped away at their group. John turned his horse back toward the hill, again getting off and leaving the beast far enough downhill that it would be hidden by the crest. He returned to Arthur's side. Rest while you can, Arthur said, his attention on the glass through which he watched the camp. I can take a watch. You should rest. I can't, John said. Then close your eyes and rest your limbs. Arthur was distracted, and John wanted to argue. However, he knew it would make him sound petulant. He settled next to Arthur and breathed deeply, letting his awareness of the land slip away as he sought a mind that had grown as familiar to him as his own. The scent of warm moss was the first hint that he had found Ghost. John opened his eyes to the blue and yellow of Ghost's vision. Ghost lay under a tree, watching as Benjen and Jaime rode horses along the outer wall of Castle Lyanna. John's heart ached when he saw his father. No matter who had sired him, Benjen Stark would always be who he thought of as his father. He didn't sleep as much as he drifted, his awareness hovering between Essos and the north. The sun was a thin line of light on the horizon and an orange glow lit the camp before John started to pull himself back to his body. Funeral pyre. John whispered, blinking to focus his mind. Khal Drogo's, Arthur agreed. He has joined his horse god in the sky. 2 large groups left during the night, but both moved toward Meereen. Away from their group. How many are left? Too many. Daenerys is still down there. At least 100 Dothraki seemed to be camped around her tent. John lifted himself enough to look over the crest of the hill. All he could see without a glass was the blurred shadows cast by 100 torches and campfires and the burial fire that dominated the center of the camp. They'd both thought that all but a few Dothraki would leave, so they had no plan for dealing with 100 horse riders. I'm impressed by her ability to inspire loyalty, John said. Arthur scoffed. I would admire it if she were queen and inspiring loyalty in the great houses. I find her ability to inspire the Dothraki inconvenient and annoying. We wait until more have left and then I will ride into camp to try to speak with her. No, Jon said. Arthur lowered the Moorish glass. The Dothraki won't slaughter me as I ride into camp. No, they'll wait until you're in it and challenge you, one after another, until you die. Do you have so little faith in me, your grace? Despite his soft tone, there was danger in Arthur's voice. You could beat any 10 Dothraki in the horde, but there are far more than 10 down there, Jon countered. Which is why we wait for more to leave. Any that are loyal to her will disengage once I introduce myself to her. You can't go alone. I can and I will, your grace. I don't trust the other men to keep you safe, so you do not need to worry about my safety. I will return to you. Arthur pinned Jon with a harsh look before he returned to watching the camp through the glass. Morning mad, the sky on the other side of the horde turned grey and pink, illuminating the tents below. A figure stood in front of the dying funeral fire. Even from this distance, Jon could see her white hair and large belly. That was Daenerys. His aunt. His blood. She turned away from the pyre and walked toward the camp, disappearing into the mass of tents. On the far side of the Khalasar, a few hundred Dothraki leaped on 2 horses, and several started herding slaves like they were cattle. Jon held his breath until the horses turned to the northeast. If any of these pieces of Drogo's Khalasar turned west and found their hidden boats, they would have to take the road to Tollus and safety. Arthur sucked in a quick breath. Get the men, he said. What is it? Horses. Now. Your grace, you will stay behind with Clee. Watch from here. He pressed the Moorish glass into Jon's hands. Run. We have no time to waste, Arthur said, his voice low and desperate, and that was enough to send Jon scrambling down the hill toward their men. They were all still in the saddle, most slumped forward when Jon ran to them. Arthur wants all the horses on the hill. Jon called. Clee came riding over, the bridle of Jon's roan in his hand. What is it? He asked. He didn't say, but the Khalasar is moving. Then we should move the other direction, one of the men said, but he followed the others as they rode hard up the hill where Arthur stood. He was not staying below the line of the hill, so the whole Khalasar would be able to see him. That went against everything Arthur had drilled into Jon for the last year. The best defense was to avoid being seen at all. That's what Arthur had always taught. And the second best defense was to kill every enemy who spotted you so they could not bring more men back. But now he stood on the crest of the hill with the morning sun shining on him. We ride. Clee, get his grace to safety if we fall. Arthur leaped on his own horse and then led their small group down the hill, straight at the Khalasar. Jon moved to the crest of the hill and brought the Moorish glass to his eye. He saw Daenerys standing behind 2 of her guards with blades drawn, and a crowd of Dothraki had surrounded them. Chapter 15. Chapter text. You must respect the Khaleesi of your former Khal, Aggo snarled. He and Jago stood in front of Daenerys while Rhaenyra stood to her side with the other Dothraki who had chosen to stand with her on the other side. I say she is not Khaleesi. I say she is witch, Qotho spat back. She brings bad luck to the Khal. Bad luck to the Khalasar. She is Khaleesi and you are a failed KO of a fallen Khal. Only children follow you, Aggo said. Daenerys saw Hidichi sliding along the shadows of a nearby tent, getting away from the growing conflict. She wasn't surprised. She had long ago decided that Hidichi was one of those women that Laena had warned her of, the sort that played their own games behind the backs of the men. She had likely wanted to be Khal Drogo's second wife, but now that he was dead and associating with Daenerys would bring her no benefit, she was leaving. Daenerys was more surprised that Irai and Jiki were at her back, staying close despite the fact that Qotho and his riders outnumbered them. Qotho wanted his revenge, and 100 Dothraki warriors, a handful of servants and 3 blood riders would not deny him. Fear crawled through Dany's guts, turning her blood to ice. Ice-killed creatures of fire. Give me the witch. Qotho didn't address Aggo or her other 2 blood riders, he spoke to the warriors who had gathered around her tent. These warriors had listened to Aggo when he spoke of her child still being the stallion that would mount the world and how it would still bring honor to the memory of Khal Drogo, but these men had not sworn themselves to her. Many probably resented Daenerys' attempts to curtail the slaving and raping. Only their desire to be remembered as part of history kept them at her side, and that was a weak lure when Kotho stood in front with his 300 or 400 riders. "You should follow Khal Drogo to the Shadowlands," Rhaenyra said. Where Ago was hot fury, Rhaenyra was cold hatred. "I renounced my oaths before Khal Drogo. I told him he had fallen from the gods and I believed he would never be allowed to ride in the great Khalasar." Kotho snapped. Daenerys sucked in a startled breath. Kotho was supposed to be blood of Drogo's blood, but he had broken his vows. Dany wanted to laugh at the thought that this was the Dothraki Jaime Lannister, a man turned oathbreaker because he could not forgive a king's insanity. Only Drogo had never burned a man alive, forcing his child to watch. Drogo had never ordered the extermination of an entire family, down to the babes. No, Drogo had only raped and killed and tried so hard to change for Daenerys when he truly did not understand her moral objections. And Kotho felt that justified repudiating his oaths. A king who would not rape without questioning his right to do so was not a king worth following. A giggle threatened to escape. "Join a true Khalasar," Kotho argued to the 100 warriors. Rhaenyra stepped forward, pulling out his arrow. His back flexed as he slashed it through the air. "I will kill any who question the blood of my blood. She has finished her trials. She has killed with her blade and brought meat to the women. She has eaten the heart of the horse." Kotho speaks as a coward who finds power only by pretending his neighbors have no strength. Kotho stiffened and Ago pulled his own arrow. Dany wanted to flee, but she was so large with child she wouldn't be able to run, even if she could. But she could not. Her blood riders would die if she showed cowardice, so she let her hand fall to the handle of the long dagger Drogo had presented her on the day she had brought home a deer to feed the women on the tribe. Hidichi, the traitorous coward, had been all smiles that day. "Strangers ride on us," a Dothraki called, but Kotho kept his attention on Rhaenyra. The two men were balanced on the edge of battle to the death, and neither seemed willing to shift. Hoofbeats of several horses pounded closer, and the fragmented Khalasar parted, unwilling to start a new battle until the power had settled. "Khaleesi," the man said, urging his horse closer until it and those that followed this man stood between Kotho's Khalasar and Dany. "I came when I heard of your marriage, to honor you, but now that I have found you, I came to offer my support." He leapt from his horse. He had dark brown hair, streaked with grey and receding on top, but what truly demanded her attention were his eyes. They were deep blue, almost violet, and wary. This was a man who expected violence, and yet he had ridden to her side instead of seeking safety. The men who followed him looked equally wary and all had hands on weapons. Kotho stepped back, moving his gaze from Rhaenyra to the stranger. Another Dothraki would have struck at that moment, but Rhaenyra held his blade, maybe to see if this new man would be a greater danger. The stranger kept his gaze on Kotho as he spoke to Dany. "I am Sir Arthur Dayne, and I have come with presents for your wedding. I have searched the Grass Sea for over a year to find you. Sir Arthur." A knot that had lived in Dany's soul for the last year loosened. Sir Arthur Kingsguard to her nephew and the true king. He had ridden all this time to find her to save her. She wanted to throw herself into his arms and let him fight these battles. She wanted to be a little girl whose worst mistake would result only in the inconvenience of having to move manners. She wanted to pretend she was not ruined, heavy with the child of a dead man. She wanted so much. But she nodded formally. "Welcome, Sir Arthur. I have lost my husband, but his son will grow to greatness that surpasses even his father." She rested her left hand on her belly, her right still on her knife. She would raise this child to be great and honorable. He would defend the weak and enforce rules that protected all men and women. And if the Dothraki would not change, the only way he would unite them would be to put them under the grass of their great sea. They could ride with their horse god in the Shadowlands and not torment the living anymore. "The bitch has killed Outkill. He came here to serve her prophecy," Kotho snarled. A moment of confusion crossed Arthur's face, likely because he didn't understand the words, but he drew his sword. The tone had been challenge enough for him. His sword gleamed white under the early morning sun. "Sword of Morning." Dany put a hand on Ago's arm when he tried to step forward, likely worrying for her safety. "My sword belongs to the princess," Arthur said, his voice low. His cool temperament was far more like Rakara than Ago. I have come to either honor her if she will stay with her Khalasar or escort her to Tolis where her family waits to welcome her, all her family. Dany sucked in a quick breath. Her nephew had come. Why? He was safe in the north, hidden from the usurper who had killed her brother. Why would he risk himself by coming for her, an action that could not be explained if he were truly the bastard-born son of a minor lord? I am mourning my husband. I will stay here until his ashes have been scattered by the wind, Dany said, hoping that would prevent a fight. With the sword of mourning here, her blood riders would do far more damage than Kotho could imagine, but she still didn't trust the 100 riders who stood at her side to fight for her. Hidichi had taught her Dothraki ways, and she had adapted as much as she could. She had done all the ceremonies of status. She had eaten the heart of a horse. She had proved her skill with a blade. Sedrold Hightower would have been proud. Her heart still ached when she thought of him putting his body between her and an entire horde. He had been the most honorable of men. But in the end, she was not Dothraki and she did not forgive them their cruelties. These men knew that. You have no right to mourn, the great Khal Kotho said. You have no right to dishonor the Khaleesi of Khal Drogo, Dany retorted with a snarl. Arthur moved closer, and Rakara took a step forward. Dany knew that Arthur was reputed to be the most dangerous swordsman in the known world, and he had been seeking her for a year, so he likely knew the weakness of the Arrok. She made a quick decision. Irai, translate, she ordered. Her handmaiden inched forward, her expression resolute but her hands shaking. Sir Arthur, I would ask a gift for my son who is to be born within the month. I ask for the life of Kotho, who would see me and my son dead because he is too weak to respect the strength of others. She lifted her chin, and Irai translated, her voice clear and firm. She had no more than said the last word before Kotho threw himself forward with a war cry. But Arthur had heard her request first, so he was ready with his sword. The ring of metal clashing filled the air, and warriors retreated quickly, leaving a space for them to fight. Dany found herself ensconced in a huddle of her women and blood riders, and she noticed that the Dothraki who had stood with her remained near her tent. Kotho's riders started screaming their support, but their screams quieted when they watched Arthur drive Kotho back, his sword flashing in the sun. The riders milled on the other side of the fight, and someone must have targeted one of Arthur's men because a fight broke out near the horses. Men shouted and a horse screamed. The riders standing on Dany's side threw themselves into that battle, and slaves scattered as the camp became a melee that spread out. Soon men were fighting on the ashes of Drogo, kicking his remains to the wind. Arthur had Kotho on his knees when a dozen riders surged forward. Trying to save a leader in single combat was the antithesis of Dothraki culture, yet Kotho's men did it. Arthur spun around, suddenly facing a mob, all armed with arrows. Dany flinched as the twang of a well-strung bow came from behind her. Ago stood with a new arrow already at his bow, and another of Kotho's men fell. Jago raised his own bow, and Rakara shifted to stand in front of both of them, protecting them from any counterattack. Daenerys crouched to make sure she did not interfere with their aim, and Irai and Jiki crouched on either side of her. Arthur was blooded now, and limping badly, but he dispatched the last of the dishonorable warriors before turning back to Kotho. Kotho's expression was full of malice. He might have crossed swords with Arthur, but he was not wounded, not blooded. His dozen fighters had done significant damage before Arthur had killed them. Dany thought of Sedrold, fighting so honorably. He had been hamstrung, yet he clung to tables that had been tipped over with one hand and swung a sword with the other. His leg was nearly cut off, yet he had fought. And he had lost. The horde had proved that numbers could succeed where honor and skill failed. Arthur took a stance, and Kotho crouched in front of him like a lion ready to pounce on prey. Before Dany could make a conscious decision, her body moved. She lunged forward, past Rakara's legs. Sedrold's voice haunted her. If you must, my lady, strike a man's most vulnerable spots. Eyes. Ears. Between a man's legs or through his back. But that is dishonorable. She had been so young. So naive. Lady Daenerys, if a man who is not sworn to your service draws a blade in your presence, he has no honor. Do not ever risk your life for a concept like honor. Strike hard and without mercy. She fisted her dagger and drove it up between Kotho's legs as Sedrold had made her practice over and over. The dummy they'd used for training had dripped straw and the servant women had needed to patch the crotch and head several times. Only this time, her knife did not find tacking and straw. The knife Drogo had gifted her sank deep into meat before hitting something hard. Hot blood poured over her hand, and Kotho screamed. It was a high sound. Desperate. Then Arthur swung his sword and Kotho's head thumped to the ground and his body fell over. Dany was still kneeling in the dirt, blood covering her from dagger to elbow. A cry went up among the riders. Usually if 2KO fought, the khalasar would yield to the winning lieutenant. This time, riders fled. They leaped on horses and gathered slaves before abandoning the camp. Arthur stood in the middle of the carnage. Dozens and dozens of Dothraki lay on the ground, dead or dying. A few men in armor had joined them in death. Arthur limped over and offered Dany his hand. "Princess," he said. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet even though he was injured. She knew the King's Guard never allowed injuries to stop them from duty, whether that was killing or showing courtesies. Besides, her belly was so large that standing was difficult. "I am no princess," she said. Sidrold had oft criticized poor Viserys when he got lost in his fantasies and insisted he was the prince or even the true king. "I disagree," Arthur said. "Baratheon's heirs are blonde-born bastards and he has proved himself incapable of ruling. The time for Targaryens to make their move approaches, princess. Your nephew will be king and you and Viserys will hold Dragonstone. Not this year or next, but the time approaches." Dany blinked. She had been raised her whole life to believe her family's reign had ended. Prince Doran whispered about taking revenge, but they did not have the army, and even if Viserys would happily declare war from his balcony in Essos, no one who met him would accept him as king. "But my nephew does not have the Targaryen name. Am I to marry him and be queen?" Dany did not think that any man would want her knowing who had used her. Besides, she was no womb wife whose only value lay in her ability to have children. Arthur chuckled while Dany's Dothraki walked the camp, dispatching the fallen and taking what they wanted from the bodies. Jon performed so well at the tourney celebrating the end of the Greyjoy rebellion that King Robert legitimized him to carry the name of his natural father. But, Dany could not think for a moment. "He's a legitimized Targaryen." "He is," Arthur said. "If you want to be queen, speak to him, but I would recommend that his grace remain available to the likes of Arianna Martell and Margaery Tyrell. Ambitious men will commit armies for the chance to move a daughter to the throne." Arthur unbuckled the armor on his left leg, and Jiki hurried to him. Arthur flinched back, but Dany reassured him, "She is the most faithful of helpers. Even when I understood nothing, she stood strong for me, and she will help you now." Arthur pressed his lips together, but he accepted her help. He called out for his surviving men, ordering them to go and find Jon. "He's here?" Dany asked, shocked. Arthur smiled at her while he raised him into a chair so she could tend his wounds. "He has been with me the whole time. I tried to order him to stay in Westeros and he said you were his aunt and he would defend his blood. This whole time we have searched and followed, he has suffered and fought alongside the men. Early in her marriage, her captivity among the Dothraki, she had lain on her furs and dreamed that someone would come for her. Sometimes she dreamed that Sidrold had survived, if only because the man had always seemed unconquerable when she was growing up. Often she dreamed of Sir Oswell riding in at night, holding out her hand and swinging her onto a tall horse before they both fled into the dark. She had the rare dream of Viserys. She knew he loved her deeply, even if he was lost in his own mind. Still, on good days, he would tell her about their mother. He would play, put mother's crown on his head, drape a scarf around his shoulder before mimicking the women of court he had watched circle their queen mother. But even on his good days, she knew he would never risk himself for her. In his delusions, she was a princess, but he was a prince. He had told her the story of Rhaenyra, making it clear that a princess should always yield to a prince. He would gleefully describe how she had been eaten slowly by having parts of her body ripped off. But Jon Targaryen, had ridden halfway around the world and had risked death to save her. She could not catch her breath. Two men rode into camp on sturdy Dothraki horses. Both of them had the dark look of Northmen. The younger had a long face and curls. Arthur stood even though Jiki was still trying to clean his wounds. "Your Grace," Arthur said when the boy dismounted, "may I present Princess Daenerys, Lady of Dragonstone and sister to your father, Prince Rhaegar." His smile was so full of relief that it stole Dany's words. She could only stare at him as he walked to her and took both his hands in hers, Cotho's blood now staining both of them. "Aunt," he whispered. "I am so sorry we could not reach you earlier, and I thank the gods old and new that you are safe." Dany forced a smile onto her face, but tears gathered in her eyes. "And who is this?" Jon asked, stepping back to look at her belly. There was no condemnation on his face. No disgust. If anything, he looked excited at the idea she would have a child by a Dothraki. "Jaehaerys," Dany whispered. Jon smiled. "For your grandfather. It's a good name." Dany didn't know why, but she started sobbing. There was no reason for it, no danger or grief, but the tears would not stop, and when Jon caught her in his arms, the tears only fell faster. Chapter 16, Back in Winterfell. Chapter text. Robb smiled when he found the courtyard where Myrcella was playing with Tommen. "There you are. I found a new kitten," Tommen announced grandly as he cuddled a small grey kitten. Sometimes Robb had trouble believing that Myrcella and Tommen were related. They were both good people, unlike the few glimpses he had gotten of the Crown Prince, but they were so different. Myrcella was rich with confidence. She didn't doubt her own strength. She was the perfect blend of northern power and southern grace. Robb wished his oldest sister would learn a little more from Myrcella. Their father had always reminded Sansa that life was not a story and that knights existed to kill a lord's enemies, not to charm ladies or save princesses. But Robb could still see his mother's heavy hand in some of her dreamy observations. No doubt she would be married to a northern lord by now without their mother's influence. But his mother had dug in her heels to an extent that Robb could not explain. She lacked the power to cancel Sansa's wedding, but she threw every impediment she could in Sansa's way. That made Robb uncomfortable given how women were vulnerable during war. And war was coming. Sometimes he wished he didn't know the family secrets. If he were ignorant, he could court Myrcella and smile at Sansa's silliness and teach Arya to shoot a bow without enduring nightmares of Prince Joffrey taking the throne and ripping Myrcella away from him, or imagine Sansa's face as she was raped, or feel the desperation to teach Arya to handle the bow and sword well enough to defend herself from soldiers. It was a burden Robb didn't want. But this was his burden to carry as the Stark in the north. If war came, the Starks would survive. And he would enjoy what peace was left to him before it came. Like his father said, war was like winter. It was always coming, but Starks always survived. He smiled at Myrcella and Tommen. Robb settled on a low stone bench that servants would often use when grinding small batches of corn by hand or dyeing fabrics. "I see that. What a beautiful kitten he is. Have you named him?" "Sir Wolfie," Tommen said. Robb raised his eyebrows at Myrcella. A poorly disguised smile quirked at the edges of her lips. Tommen said, "Everyone else has wolves, so I should as well." "Well argued," Robb said, trying hard to not laugh. It would not be proper to laugh at a prince. Not that Tommen would ever take his ire out on others, even if they laughed at him. Tommen was not the sort of child who would survive the intrigues of King's Landing. Robb had no idea how the king and queen had managed to create such a naive and sweet boy, considering that neither of them possessed either trait. "I'm going to go introduce him to the wolves," Tommen said as he cuddled the white kitten to his chest and ran toward the stables. Both the wolves and cats like to hunt the vermin attracted by the seed in the stable, although with the wolves Robb suspected their hunts were more play than any serious desire to eat rats or badgers. Myrcella smiled as Tommen ran away, his narrow sword bouncing on his hip. "He's changed so much," she said. "How so?" Robb brushed off a section of the wall next to him so that she would not dirty her skirts if she chose to sit on the wall. She smiled and accepted his silent invitation. In the Red Keep, he was always so quiet. It was as if he were disappearing into the shadows. She gave a whisper of a sigh. Perhaps frightened would be a more apt descriptor. "Water dancing has helped him find his confidence," Robb said, diplomatically ignoring the implied insult toward the parental incompetence of the king or the cruelty of a psychopathic prince. Myrcella gave him a very knowing look, and Robb shrugged. That was as close as he would come to admitting he knew exactly what she actually meant. "Are you done with your tasks for the day, my lord?" "Aye. When father left me in charge, I will admit that I did not understand how much it entailed. Father always insisted that Sansa and I know everything there is to know about running Winterfell, yet I still managed to underestimate how much parchment is actually required. Robb sometimes fantasized about shooting the ravens who flew toward the castle just so he would have some respite from the demands of unreasonable lords. If it were not for his mother and Lewyn sorting the messages and helping him keep organized, he would have been buried under the work. Myrcella pursed her lips. I understand that ruling well requires a significant effort. After that, a silence descended. Robb wondered if she thought at all about her own father, who famously put little effort into ruling. He sat next to the Princess of the Seven Kingdoms and watched servants hang laundry. He never thought he would marry a princess. As a child, he'd actually been rather fond of Aelys Carstock. But Myrcella had that lady's strength of character while still retaining a sweetness that most northern ladies either lacked or concealed. It was possible they hid any softer emotions for fear that their weakness would be used against their husbands or sons. The North was not the Vale or the Reach where women were sheltered from the consequence of their husbands' failures. The sounds of Winterfell surrounded them. The distant calls of groomsmen, the soft laughter of maids, the thumps of someone beating a rug and horses whinnying. If Robb had been sitting with someone else, he was sure the quiet would be awkward. With Myrcella, it felt comfortable. As the sun drooped in the sky and highlighted golden strands in her raven dark hair, he could forget duty and his family's political machinations. After all, he wasn't good at them. The first time he had awkwardly mentioned his great love for his siblings as he attempted to fulfill his father's request, Myrcella had recognized his awkward political machinations within 2 minutes and then cheerfully followed his lead. She had given them the excuse they needed to bring Tommen north for fostering, and since then, she had shown she could almost read his thoughts as if he were a wild wolf and she a warg. It was far more comfortable than having to explain his conflicted feelings. At least it was comfortable as long as she could not also read his thoughts and learn of his father's treason or his cousin's identity. And how did your day go, Princess? Your sister is quite wroth, I'm afraid. Would this be my elder or younger sister? While they were as different as the dawn and the night, they both had a stubbornness and stark force of personality that made them more alike than either would admit. Your elder. I don't think Arya gets wrath. She gets revenge. Robb grimaced. I had noticed. He had learned to avoid insulting her or check both under and in his bed before attempting to lie down. Myrcella laughed. I know northern men are a different breed, but I do wonder if there is any northern man who will be willing to risk your sister's eye long enough to wed her. Perhaps the Umbers. They are known for having more courage than common sense. Too bad there are no male Mormonts of an age. Arya would be happy on their island. A lack of common sense might be an admirable trait in any man who seeks her hand, Myrcella said, but she lacked the sharp edge of disapproval Sansa had any time she discussed Arya's lack of manners or her terrible influence on Aubrey Redwyne. Aubrey had arrived in Winterfell with all the proper manners of a Reach girl, and now she was as like to be racing a horse across the field or hunting rabbits as practicing her embroidery. Sansa did not approve. And what is Sansa's cause for distress? Robb asked. Your mother has announced that she will not be allowed to start her wedding cloak this year. But the Hornwoods have left. Surely a time for the wedding has been set. Given their father's concern with seeing Sansa to a good marriage with an honorable man, Robb had been surprised at the departure, but he did not attempt to speak with either Darren or his mother. Petitions and preparations for winter demanded his full attention, and that matter had seemed settled enough to not need his oversight. Myrcella's expression remained innocent and calm, but something made Robb think she was using words to move him. Lady Stark has said that a bride must embroider her own cloak to demonstrate that she has not only the requisite skills but also the tenacity required to be lady of her own keep. While Sansa possesses tenacity in excess when it comes to the needle, apparently she lacks the appropriate fabrics. She lacks fabrics. Robb was quite certain he had misheard that. Myrcella hummed. Apparently with both Aubrey Redwyne and Tansela Blackwood fostering here as well as my brother and myself, your mother has depleted the castle's entire supply of fine fabrics. I heard Sansa and Jane bemoaning the fact that Sansa would die of old age before suitable fabrics in appropriate quantities arrived. She will waste away from mourning her inability to marry the handsome, noble, brave, and winsome Darren Hornwood. While that did sound inappropriately dramatic and entirely accurate for Sangza, Rob was bothered by the idea that they needed to wait for fabrics. He kept the books for Winterfell, and their coffers were full. His mother could send servants to White Harbor with a large enough purse to buy fabric for a dozen maiden cloaks. That sounds unfortunate, Rob said slowly. Myrcella hummed again. Rob had learned that meant she would not comment on the political machinations or stupidity of others. At least not where she might be overheard. If his father were here, Rob would ask Lord Stark to insist on finalizing the betrothal before another lady caught young Lord Hornwood's eye. But to throw such impediments in the way to insist that Sangza was not responsible enough to marry because she lacked the persistence to embroider fabric that was not even available. This was unconscionable. Rob wondered whether their mother disliked the idea of Sangza marrying Darin in particular or whether she still held out hope for a match in the south. It could be either. But Sangza was 15 now, and Rob had heard many times at the dinner table how it could take a girl a good year to make a wedding cloak if she wanted to truly impress her husband with the quality of her stitches. She needed to start the cloak. Rob's head started to throb. Myrcella folded her hands in her lap and studied Rob. "What shall you do, my lord?" She sounded so sweet and innocent, but Rob now understood she had chosen this quiet corner to entertain her brother, knowing Rob would pass by and that they would have the privacy for such a delicate conversation. After all, his mother would be her good mother, and no good daughter wanted to poison that relationship before the marriage even happened. Of course Rob intended to be part of a treason against his future good father, but she could not know that. He could wait until his father returned for more supplies or to review Winterfell business and have him handle his mother's reluctance, but his father might not return within the year. And then Sangza would only begin her cloak once she turned 16. Worse, Darin Hornwood might develop an eye for another. Alis had paid attention to Rob often enough, but now that he had a betrothal, the Carstocks would see Hornwood as a good match, as would the Mormonts and Dustins. The latter two houses had far too many daughters to leave a prized lord unmarried for long. Rob glanced at Myrcella as she watched him, her expression serene. "I must write to the Hornwoods to discuss the terms of betrothal and set the timeline. And the next time they visit, I shall have to ensure my mother does not act as the primary host." Rob had believed she wished to help him since being the Stark of Winterfell had required so much of him. In fact, he relied on her good advice in any number of areas, but now he had to wonder if his mother's goals and his own aligned. "You may find the matter trivial, but you must also secure fabric. It would be a dishonor for Sangza to stand under a cloak of coarse material or one made too hurriedly because she did not have the fabric for an appropriate time," Myrcella added. Rob smiled. She had not asked him to take one position or another, but as soon as he had stated his intentions, she ably assisted him. He was grateful every day that when it was time for him to marry, he would stand under the godswood with this woman. He would marry her today. Only announcing a date would lead to the royal court moving north, and with Dane and Jon in Essos, they could not take the risk. A royal visit would allow potential assassins into the heart of Winterfell. "If necessary, I will make the purchases myself." Rob grimaced. "I have no idea how to make such purchases." Myrcella's expression had a hint of sly amusement now. "No doubt you could ask Sangza. I'm sure she has opinions." Sangza never lacked opinions, but on a topic such as fabric, she would torture Rob with the details. "I'm sure if I asked her, she would insist on taking a wagon down the King's Road to White Harbor so she could examine every bolt of fabric that came from every ship from Essos until she had found perfection. She would be mightily torn between her need to start her cloak quickly and the desire to begin with perfect materials," Myrcella agreed. "My mother would not allow her to travel," Rob said. He could override his mother, but on the subject of the Stark daughters, he had little leverage. It would cause discomfort in the staff to be caught between the orders of Sangza's mother and the orders of the temporary Stark of Winterfell. "I could send a servant," some seamstress Rob suggested. "Such is women's work, and those women take orders from your mother. If she wishes to delay this marriage or even obstruct it, you will open a door that invites invasion," she warned. Rob was at a loss. It was such a small conflict, but he had found his life as the temporary Lord of Winterfell consisted of such small dilemmas which constantly nibbled away at him until he was ready to lose his mind. Two farmers were in a terrible conflict because one man had planted a field but the other man missed reading the markers and had watered that same field. How much of the harvest could each farmer claim? What was the labor of the water worth? Two servants each blamed each other for the loss of an entire vat of preserves to a creeping grey fungus, each suggesting the other should be beaten for incompetence. Two lords sent complaints about small folk gone missing on the road, each one accusing the other of preying upon women and killing the men to hide witnesses. A million small decisions, none of them with easy answers, were like gnats buzzing in his ears until he almost wished that he were facing a boar with a solid spear in his hand rather than one more petition. Rob considered Myrcella. "Princess, have you given thought to traveling through the north?" Her smile was the sun coming out from behind a cloud in the aftermath of a storm. She laughed. "Should I, like your father, go on a grand tour? Perhaps like him, I can take some craftsman and offer to repair what I find broken. I have no doubt that your beauty alone would be enough to improve any part of the north that you visit," Rob said. For one moment, he was proud of how that sounded like something from one of the books Sangza, but then his face heated. He sounded like a fool. Myrcella tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Perhaps I can take my beauty and my purse to White Harbor. I do believe that, as my mother's daughter, I know quality fabric. My lady, I would be eternally grateful if you would rescue me." She ducked her head and offered a crooked smile. "I would never turn down a request for succor, but there is the issue of security." "Security? Of course I shall send a full company of Northmen with you, in addition to the royal guards, as many as the commander finds appropriate." Rob found issues of defense and weaponry far less daunting than those of lace and wool. "It is what the commander finds appropriate that concerns me," Myrcella said. "Sir Bywater has certain requirements regarding security. Have you noticed that I always invite Tommen when we ride? I understand you are his only family here. And he will be my good brother. He is always welcome on our rides," Rob hurried to reassure her. He loved spending time with Tommen and it would be inappropriate for him to spend too much time with Myrcella alone, even if the guards followed. "My lord, you misunderstand. Tommen would happily stay here with his cats or with Greyjoy, whose company enjoys. I am not sure whether Greyjoy was always a quiet boy or whether it was losing so much of his family in the war that has turned him such, but Tommen likes having a friend who does not overpower him with speech. Like Arya," Rob guessed. "Like Arya and Aubrey and even Sansa and Jane and Tanzala. They are all somewhat loud." "To call them loud is to suggest that winter is chilly," Rob said. "They are loud like a thundering herd of elk. They are loud like the wolves when they all howl at some imaginary enemy. They are loud like winter winds howling through the trees. Does that capture what you would say of the girls of Winterfell?" She hid her mouth and a small giggle before saying, "I would never say something so uncouth about my future good sisters or the Fosters of my future house." "No, you would never be uncouth, my princess," Rob agreed with a laugh. "However, I fail to see how our rides and the noise generated by excited girls and the issue of Sansa's cloak are related. Commander Bywater has ordered us to stay together anytime we are outside the walls of Winterfell. I did not tell you because I did not wish for you to feel it necessary to advocate for my independence. I understand that the guard dislikes splitting their attention between Tommen and myself." She nodded towards the wall where even now a royal guard stood, not watching the hills as the Winterfell guards were, but with his back to those potential dangers so that he could watch Myrcella. Rob knew there were guards behind them as well, royal guards specifically chosen because they would die for the princess if needed. These men were surrounded by soldiers who held a different loyalty. Knowing that the Starks planned to stand against the Baratheons and any other claimants to the Iron Throne, he was painfully aware of the difficult position these guards were in. But despite being outnumbered by Starks, despite being far from families, despite being housed in an unfamiliar setting, they were unflaggingly loyal to Tommen and Myrcella. "I would not ask you to do that which puts you or your guard in a difficult position. But I wish to go, and if I am to be Lady Stark, I should know the major cities of the land I will help you rule." "Then why bring up Sir Bywater's concerns? Do you fear he would refuse to allow you to travel to White Harbor, or do you suggest that Tommen should attend you on your voyage?" Myrcella studied the far wall and the guards standing upon it. "Tommen has seen the work you must do to keep Winterfell running, and perhaps he should see how other lords handle their land. He is soon to be 9, and I know he acts young. Father had no time for him, and mother would reward him with attention only when he was sick or needy. She enjoyed his company when he cuddled with her, but she quite disliked any time he emulated our father. Tommen worked hard to keep the attention of the only parent he had. She took a breath. He should explore. He should be brave. Second sons often must be far braver than first, Rob said. She gave him a questioning look. I have my path charted, he explained. There is no mystery of what course my life will follow, but I often think that Bran and Rickon have the more difficult waters to navigate. What shall they be? Where shall they live? What shall they do? Sometimes the second and third sons have gone to the war. Many Starks have been commanders there, but I cannot think that I would ever be happy knowing that one of my little brothers lived in such a place without his family. But there is no set path. I've always assumed that one of them would become Lord of Whale Song. Your father hopes to create a great trade in whaling. Surely that would require a great settlement to support it. But that would be one settlement. I have 2 brothers. You have minded your lessons. You are quite proficient in counting to 2, Myrcella teased. Indeed. I can even reach 5 on good days, he said in a solemn tone. But I see your concerns. I can speak with Sir Bywater about allowing Tommen to visit White Harbour and learn how they handle trade. I'm sure Lord Willis would be happy to give you and Prince Tommen a few lessons, as well as a tour that could include many cloth merchants. Thank you, Myrcella said, her tone unexpectedly serious. You are assisting me in circumventing my mother's schemes. But you understand the difficult path Tommen is on, and you are willing to help him. Rob rested his hand on the bench right next to Myrcella's leg. He will be my good brother. Family. For a Stark, there is nothing more important than family, and nothing we will not do to help them. She touched the back of Rob's hand, and a shiver travelled up his spine. You are a good man. Rob hoped she believed that after the truth was revealed. I shall speak with Sir Bywater before evening supper. Just make sure he does not lock us away like Targaryen maidens locked in a tower. Rob lifted one strand of her black hair. You are no Targaryen, my princess, but I shall make sure he understands that both you and Tommen have tasks to complete. You say I am no Targaryen, yet my father's grandmother carried that very name, as much as he refuses to speak it. And Bywater would rather lock us up like Baelor's maidens than risk one of us getting a scraped knee. Only the Stark name keeps him from imprisoning us in the castle. Please make sure he knows that he would earn your displeasure if he attempts it. I shall, Rob promised. Then he sighed. I should speak with Mother and tell Sansa that she should plan her cloak's design, because you will return with the fabric once Tommen has had a chance to learn of trade and explore White Harbour. Myrcella smiled at him brightly. My lord makes wise decisions. Your lord would rather hide from his mother like an untutored child, Rob countered. Your lord would rather face a charging bear, a rutting elk, an aggravated boar. However, Starks are not cowards, and I will not hide from her. Myrcella's smile turned devious. I believe I have the easier task. She strode across the courtyard, and the 2 guards in the shadows of the old tower followed a second later. Facing his mother was far more challenging. It was the strength of knowing that he would disappoint Myrcella failed that gave him power. Besides, the Dustin heir was an honorable man who truly cared for Sansa. If the Dustins were to grow so offended that they withdrew the betrothal, Sansa would pay for their mother's obduracy. Rob did not want to see his sister lose a good husband just because his lady mother believed there was a better one waiting. Maybe there were better men in the south. Maybe if Sansa took 2 years to wander the southern kingdoms meeting all the lord's heirs, she would find someone that she loved. But Rob doubted it. His mother was looking toward men with more wealth or lands, but now that Rob had Myrcella here and understood the strength that came from having a partnership with someone who you cared for and who cared for you, he would move the world to give Sansa the same. Luckily, he only had to move his mother. And he would. He set out for the Lady's Solar. He was going to challenge the dragon in her own nest. Chapter 17, Ned's Explanation. Chapter Text. Ned. Robert shouted when Ned walked into the small council room next to Lord Royce. Ned hoped that meant that he was not to be arrested. Your Grace, Ned answered. Robert stood and came around the table, catching Ned's arms before pulling him in for a hug. Tywin Lannister sat at the table looking as if he had just found a worm in his meat, and the Kingsguard all tensed, but Ned hugged his friend back. Ned had more complex feelings toward Robert in this lifetime, but part of him would always love his friend. After a few powerful backslaps, Robert stepped away. "See, you vipers. You said he was plotting against me, but here he is. My friend. And without any guard because he trusts me." Robert's glare was particularly vicious when he looked at Tywine. The man didn't even twitch under the king's ire. Ned wondered if he had claimed a seat in the council or if he used the loans he had given the crown to demand a seat where he was not entitled to one. "I thought to come and speak for any decisions that would cause the realm such disquiet," Ned said. Robert snorted. "Disquiet?" He returned to his chair and picked up his ale. "Come. Sit. Explain to these cunts why they're idiots." "I would not describe them thus," Ned said. Aggravating Tywine was a dangerous game, one Ned had no interest in playing when he was alone in the city. He noted that Stannis was missing, as was Renly. Perhaps Cersei's secrets had reached their ears. But the Queen was not here and Robert was speaking of Ned's supposed sins, not hers. "I would," Robert said with a laugh. "You can't give him your arguments and let him answer." Robert turned to Ned. "They would have me condemn you without letting you speak. They wanted me to issue a huge fine. 40,000 dragons." Ned paled. "That would have crippled the North. We could not pay such a fine. We would have to borrow from the Iron Bank and the interest would drain our coffers." He chose to remain standing and to keep his guard up. He had to navigate these treacherous waters carefully because Ned was plotting against his king for the second time in his life. "Told you," Robert said maliciously to Tywine. Tywine's mouth tightened, but he did not protest. "Perhaps I can lay out the accusations," Lord Marndale suggested. "We can address them one at a time." Wyman sounded affable, but then he always did, even when he was ordering the death of a murderer or plotting to kill Freys in another lifetime. Ned knew better than to underestimate the Lord, and he trusted Wyman was on his side. "Go on then," Robert said more agreeably. It was clear that he liked Wyman. Given how much Robert liked to spend coin and how Wyman liked to save, that was a surprise. Wyman cleared his throat and unrolled a parchment. "I've written them down as they were mentioned. First, that Lord Stark has hidden a large population and built a northern city while falsifying the royal census. The royal census has not been done for 20 years, and it was done properly," Ned said. "The people who live in Whale Song were north of the wall then, and they were properly omitted from the count. They're wildlings." Pycelle gasped. His chains clanged as he physically recoiled. "Savages. Cannibals. South of the wall where they can ride farther into the kingdom unfettered." His horror was etched into his face. Ned knew this decision would be unpopular. In another generation, it might even be disastrous as the grandchildren of free folk rebelled against Robb's children. But it was the best solution for the coming war. Umber and Bolton negotiated only with those free folk who had wives and children. "Families have moved south of the wall because I have work and land for them. I could not set up whaling without that population, and I needed the whales for the meat they provide my people and those at the wall. The brothers in black have gone hungry too often. I will not allow it on my watch." "How many people are we talking about?" Robert asked. Ned would have happily lied, but he didn't know how much Yohn Royce had seen in Whale Song, and Jorah's wife certainly would have seen far too much. He was grateful that his people had kept her and Jorah away from the giants. That would have been a more difficult conversation. "Between 50 and 60,000 are at Whale Song, another 1,000 at Tail End and 2,000 or so scattered in the lands of Umber and Bolton. Other lords may have taken a few families, but those are the main populations. While Whale Song was 10% of King's Landing, that population made it larger than White Harbour and close to Gulltown." "How do you have work for so many?" Wyman asked. "Many free folk find their own employment in the mountains, hunting and trapping. However, the real employment for most is whaling. When a whale is brought in, many hands must render the fats, capture the oils, dry or salt the meat, preserve the baleen, clean the bones, and haul away the corrupt parts before the smell seeps into the city. It takes hundreds, maybe thousands." Wyman looked stunned, but he cleared his throat and looked down at his parchment again. "This leads to the second accusation, that Lord Stark has avoided paying the proper taxes to the crown. This is the most serious of the given charges. I must ask, my lord, how you are paying these workers. Wyman sounded apologetic for even asking. I am not, Ned answered. What? Robert demanded, but then he laughed. You get men to work for free. I should make you my master of coin. We'd pay off the debts in a year. Free folk have a different culture, your grace. They have no interest in coin. They take payment by claiming a portion of the meat, fats, oils harvested from the animal. One woman might make preserved food with the rendered fat, dried meat, berries and grain for the brothers on the wall. She would keep a portion and ask for no coin. Then she could trade her rations for woven cloth or grains or furniture or keep it and feed her family. It's true, Lord Royce said. I saw their houses. They had painted signs above their door with images of what they make and can trade away. They would then put up smaller signs near the path if they needed some good. The valley Whale Song sits in is long, and people would walk paths along the two sides with baskets of wares looking to trade. It is an inefficient system, but Lord Stark reports that they prefer it to coin, which they place no value on. So, no coin is exchanged at all? Wyman asked. Have you no thought for profit from such a large city? Ned considered his answer. Right now, all excess goes to the wall or to building in Whale Song. Eventually I hope to have oil or whalebone I can export. Ebenezer are teaching us uses for baleen and oil, but so far my people have ruined far more than they have correctly rendered. It is expected when learning a new skill, especially with a product that will rot if not prepared correctly. That was a gross exaggeration, but one that Ned trusted to stand up to scrutiny. The Ebenezer were excellent teachers and the free folk disinclined to waste even a thumb of food, and that had made them quick learners. But these nobles would be inclined to believe the worst of both groups. So we may see taxes eventually, but I see no evidence that Ned has done anything wrong, Wyman said happily. But, your grace, the wildlings. Pycelle's distress seemed extreme. It's Ned's domain. He can do as he likes, Robert said, and while Pycelle turned red, he did close his mouth. To the next accusation, Wyman said. It is charged that Lord Stark is preparing an army and plans to rebel against the throne. Robert snorted his derision. Is this not the most serious charge rather than the suggestion I kept taxes? Ned asked. Should I not have addressed this first? Given only Lannister believes it, no. Robert glared at Tywine. He has trained most of his bannerman's people and now we know he has tens of thousands of men available to march. The concern is not without basis. And I am training an army, Ned said. Robert spat out the ale he had been drinking. The free folk wanted to come south because something is hunting them, an army or enemy powerful enough to wipe out entire villages. They were willing to abandon their homes and their laws in order to find safety south of the wall. I fear I may need an army and I may soon call on the other kingdoms to raise their banners for me. All humor vanished. Robert put his ale down and Tywine leaned forward. Pycelle looked to Tywine as if trying to decide how he should react, and Wyman lost most of the color from his face. What enemy? Robert asked, his voice low and dangerous. I know not, Ned said. It left no survivors to tell tales, eliminating entire villages in a night. The free folk are afraid. They would not have left their homes were they not, and they arm themselves, down to children so young that I would fear to allow them to touch a sharp blade. They live in Whale Song only because there is food and fortifications against the enemy to the north. Lord Royce spoke. Again, I can confirm. When I saw the city, they had watchtowers north of the valley, set high on the mountain sides. They had no fortifications against the south. Or the east, Ned said. He didn't tell them that the giants lived at the far end of the valley. They were gentle creatures, huge and furred and much more interested in combing through each other's fur than fighting, but when riled, they were brutal killers. The city is not what you would think of as a city. It is far more spread out. Along the length of a valley it takes a full day to ride with farmland between the two strips of houses and workshops. But we have no fortifications to the east. The free folk only fear the enemy to the north. You must know what sort of enemy you face, Robert said. Ned shook his head. I have no idea, but my ancestors felt there was something so dangerous that they built the wall. It could be some kingdom to the west has sailed to the westernmost part of my lands, the lands of always winter. Robert pounded his fist on the table. We'll crush them. We will, but I would have us choose our own battlefields and make use of the wall my ancestors built, especially as I do not know what faces us. It might be an army or men or some great beasts that have overpopulated their native lands and now wander south. What beasts could threaten whole villages? Dragons, Ned said. Robert jerked, but Ned continued. They are beasts of fire, so I do not believe the north is home to such, but there may be some other fantastical creature. I know mammoths are real, and some equally large predator may be feasting on those creatures and the free folk both. It could even be the others raised up from legend for all I know, but I do my best to make sure the North will hold, as is my responsibility as Warden of the North. You have been preparing armies for years, yet you have never brought this concern to the crown, Tywine said in a suspicious tone. I started training because Benjen hoped to limit the cost of running Castle Lionel. The Crannog men would not harvest the blood poison powders unless I promised protection. 4 generations of Starks saved to renovate Moat Cailin, but Lord Howland said that the moat best protects the rest of the north, not his lands. He asked for a southern castle with a standing army to prevent a host from invading his swamps and damaging the land. He believes in his own people's ability to kill invaders seeking to steal the secrets of his land, but not in his ability to prevent the land from being damaged in such a conflict. So Benjen must maintain soldiers at the castle, and training a rotation of soldiers was the most economical way to meet that obligation. Wyman chuckled. He took a fiscal obligation and turned it into a boon. Benjen is a wise man. Ned smiled at him. He is. And as for why I have not brought this to the crown so far, there are only rumors. If you sent armies north right now, you would only eat our supplies and your own. There is no one to fight, not yet. If you want to send help, have stonemasons sail north. They can help repair the wall and prepare Whale Song and Last Hearth, which are the northernmost keeps of all my people. Robert turned to Wyman. How many stonemasons can we afford to employ? Wyman blew out a breath. I am unsure, my grace. 10 or 20, mayhaps, but they would require guards and assistants, so likely fewer. They are skilled workers, some of the most expensive to employ, Ned agreed when Robert made a face. However, I can provide assistants and even have a few apprentices working with them. I will also provide the guards and provisions. My people will be in Whale Song for another month before they travel to the wall. They will begin at the western forts and work their way east, repairing and reinforcing the wall as they travel. They will go south, reinforcing Umberland before they will end on Bolton Land, where they will complete the new Bolton dock at Weeping, where we hope to trade whalebone, lumber, and other goods that are too heavy for transport to White Harbour. I will send a raven telling my people to expect your masons. Ned trusted them to hide the giants well. They could haul the rough stone and timber to the various sites at night before the masons and builders came in to fit it to the castles. Coordinate with Wyman. We'll send who we can, Robert said. Ned nodded. He'd send the raven today. I need to return north as soon as possible. Can you ask at the harbour for a ship headed to White Harbour or Whale Song? Wyman said. I'll see it done. I have another concern, Tywine said. You see danger coming from the north, yet you have the prince and princess at Winterfell. Winterfell is 20 days from the wall for a fast rider moving fast during clear weather. I would expect an army to take at least 2 months to move the same distance. That was not accurate given the dead didn't sleep or tire, but they also shambled. It had taken over a month for them to cross the distance last time, and this time the north was more prepared. At the first sign of trouble, our scouts will send ravens and we will evacuate the women and children. Ned'll keep them safe, Robert said in a tone that brooked no argument. How are the children? Ned smiled. Myrcella is a gracious young woman. She has taken up the bow and often rides with the children. My maester reports she has a deft tongue for languages and a sharp mind for figures. And Tommen has taken a liking to Bravo Seawater dancing. The last messenger who arrived brought word from my lady wife that he was becoming a talented swordsman. Robert roared with laughter. That's my boy. I knew if he got away from his poisonous mother he would grow a cock and turn into a real man. Tywine's expression was granite. He came to Winterfell a boy, your grace. Every boy is soft. Even you were. Ha. Never. Robert laughed, but it was clear he understood what Ned meant. I hear you have more wards now. Ned agreed, a girl from the Reach who is too large and rough for a Southron husband, a nephew of House Woad who is not yet 10 name days, the youngest Greyjoy boy who is not 6 name days, and a Riverlands girl who lost her mother. Most recently we have inherited 2 Riverland boys. They had hoped to squire, but the North has no knights. You're running a nursery and preparing for a war. Robert seemed amused. Ned wondered if he understood it was the presence of the prince and princess that was attracting other children to Winterfell. The Riverlands boys certainly would not want to settle in the North, but if they could establish a friendship with the royal prince, their families would consider their fostering a success. Kat had tried to get her sister to send little Robin to foster at Winterfell for that very reason, but she had not succeeded. She would have more luck writing to Jon Arryn, but she had not wanted to give her sister's husband cause to take the child when Lysa was not ready to let him go. The boy must be near 10 name days by now, old enough to be interested in more than clinging to a mother. Ned was just glad Jon Arryn had survived longer in this world, and he hoped that meant Robin had a better life. My lady wife is well acquainted with raising children, Ned said. I have little to do with it. But there are plans to evacuate all the children if the danger appears at the wall. They may all be grown with children of their own before the enemy appears. We should march north and drive them from our shores, Robert said. Mayhaps we can after the winter, your grace. Signs are that this will be the coldest and longest winter in many generations, so we dare not march north now, not when we do not know how much of our food supplies we will use to feed the small folk. In hard winters, our old will often walk into the wilderness to die rather than eat food that could be used to save babes. I will not take even a thumb of food from any of my bannermen until they get a spring harvest in their larder. Robert looked unhappy, but he didn't argue. Wyman looked relieved at that. No doubt the crown purse was still suffering under too much debt and calling the banners was a cost they could ill afford. Ned would not be able to pay for the preparations he was making if it were not for the fact that free folk bartered and considered strengthening the defences against the Night King a communal obligation. There is only one other matter, Varys said with a twittering laugh that made Ned irrationally angry. In this life, Varys had done nothing to him, but Ned still disliked him. Worse, he considered the man the most dangerous threat at the table now that Littlefinger had been sidelined. We have received word that Arthur Dayne is in Essos. He studied Ned from under his eyelashes as if he were a maiden trying to woo him. What is the concern? He is not in West Eos, Ned said, feigning a disinterest he did not feel. This secret had the power to send him to the executioner. You killed him, Robert said. His confusion was quickly becoming anger. You told me that. Nay, Ned said, arranging his expression to show confusion. I said I had bested him. Despite standing guard at the tower, I found a way through the rocks, which allowed me to escape his notice. My concern was for finding Lyanna, not starting a fight I could not hope to win. You left him at your back. Robert demanded, pounding his fists against the table. You thought I could fight the Sword of Morning and survive. Ned crafted his expression with great care. This is where he either bluffed his way to freedom or lost his life. Robert's mouth opened, but he said nothing. Varys' gaze darted from one to the other. I thought he had retreated to Dorne to guard Lyanna because he had suffered some serious injury, Robert said. You thought I attacked a man too wounded to defend himself? Ned asked. Robert winced. I thought that was why you avoided discussing the matter. Ned blinked, feigning horror and shock. Your Grace, Ned said slowly, I avoided discussing that day because I lost my sister. Robert had the decency to blush, but then the anger leached back in. The Sword of Morning is still out there. How could you not tell me, he shouted. Arthur Dayne was not one I gave any thought to. The Targaryens were dead, and he was one more fallen servant of a fallen regime. I didn't think about Hightower or Went or any of the guards who fled to Essos. It's not the same. Dayne is the Sword of Morning. Your Grace, Ned said slowly, he is not one I spend my time thinking on. I have duties in the north, and that is where I keep my attention. Robert stared at him for long minutes. You should have told me, he said darkly. Ned knew him well enough to see the fury bubbling under his skin. He bowed his head. I apologize, Your Grace. When you did not hunt down Went and Hightower, I gave it no more thought. You have my apology and my regret. We have been friends for too long for me to disappoint you so significantly. The words made Ned's stomach sour, but lies were small sins compared to the manipulations common in the capital. Only silence answered for long minutes, and then Robert sighed. Don't talk like that. You look like you're about to fall to your knees, Robert groused, which meant his anger had passed. Ned looked up. I am sorry. If I had known, he let his words trail off. Robert waved a hand at him, dismissing the whole topic. Now, is there anyone else who wants to cast aspersions on my oldest friend? His tone made it clear that the next person who spoke would bring down the king's fury on his head. The few members of the small council present had the good sense to remain silent, and Robert gave a satisfied nod. Now, what are we doing about Lyanna Mormont? She spoke out against her liege lord, spreading lies. And lying to the king is treason. Tywin Lannister sat a little taller. She is little more than a child, your grace. She can be forgiven for misunderstanding a situation. It's not as if she was educated in finances or the duties of a warden. Then Jorah Mormont is to blame for not controlling his bitch of a wife, Robert said. I'll not have my foster brother troubled with such a treasonous bannerman. There must be punishment, Robert declared. Exile, Ned said before Robert could get too bloodthirsty. He can make a new life for himself in Essos. Mage Mormont is a good woman. She can hold Bear Island. If he is to be exiled, House Lannister would reclaim Lyanna rather than have her exposed to the danger and immorality of Essos, Tywin said. Robert looked bored at the idea of such bloodless punishment. Whichever you want. I don't care. He upended his cup, gulping the ale before banging it back down on the table. Come on, Ned. I want to show you my new horse. I'll have my stewards prepare a hunt for us, and we can pretend we're 20 and have all the lasses watching us. The lasses never watched me, your grace, Ned said. Robert came around the table and slung his arm over Ned's shoulders. I know I got most of the attention, but plenty of girls like the shy, quiet ones. I bet we could find you a woman, still. I am true to my vows, your grace. Always with duty, Robert said in a disgusted voice. Now that you're here, we're going to have some fun, at least drinking and hunting if you refuse to bed the prettiest whores in Westeros. I'll teach you there is more to life than duty. He pulled Ned toward the door, and Ned allowed him. Ned had thought the existence of Arthur Dayne would destroy any trust between them, but Robert was so deep in his cups, neither logic nor suspicion could take root. That should be a relief, but all Ned could feel as Robert pulled him out of the room was guilt. Bone-deep guilt. Chapter 18. Chapter text. Ned slipped away from the Red Keep to find a certain blacksmith. Toib Homart had his shop in the same place, but Gendry was no longer an apprentice. He was a man grown, wider of shoulder than the half-starved exile who Daenerys had named the new Lord of Storm's End. Ned offered both a place of honor in the north and told Toibho that he had a Valyrian steel sword he would like reworked into two swords, but that he would not bring it south. The blacksmith's gaze was too sharp. Just like in the last life, the man was too wily to miss the signs of impending war. Likely everyone in King's Landing was uncomfortable with Tywin Lannister settling into the Red Keep after avoiding the city for almost 2 decades. The blacksmith had likely heard even more rumors than Ned had. As Olenna Tyrell had once said, rumors were more common than rats in King's Landing. Ned suspected Varys. He had the unpleasant suspicion that Rhaegar's Kingsguard were working with the man, and he had few options to protect Jon from their expectations. Toibho agreed to go north for the promise of a solid-built stone house, land, a forge and a yearly salary. Ned asked only that he bring Gendry, and they wrote the agreement. Ned sealed it with his signet before leaving. Hopefully those were 2 more pieces that would not get chewed up by the war. Still, every time Ned passed a child or saw a shopkeeper with his wares, he was painfully aware that all these people would be the true victims of any war. Even if Arthur could keep Daenerys from going down the path of madness and fire, war would starve them, destroy their homes and breed crime and rats and disease. These would be the true victims, and Ned could hardly look at any of them. How many had survived the last war? How many had survived the burning of King's Landing? A mad Targaryen was a terrible thing, and Daenerys carried the seed of madness. Most warriors did. War taught men the true nature of their worst self. He had seen honest men loot and kind men rape. Many refused to speak on what they had done in war because of it, but a dragon magnified those seeds of cruelty. Being in this cursed city brought back nightmares of his old life, but Ned could not arrange his own travel home without Robert's permission. They had grown up together and had fought for their lives shoulder to shoulder when King Aeus had called for their heads, but now Ned had no freedom unless he was given it by Robert, and Robert refused permission until Ned had fun. Fun. The irresponsibility of wasting time and supplies while winter approached horrified him. For the first time, he had sympathy for the free folk and their hatred for kneeling. Still, duty and honor and the last traces of a fading friendship drove him back to the Red Keep. A week later, the courtyard was full of preparations. Elaborate tents, wagons full of every luxury and hundreds of servants crowded the large space. Horses stood saddled and bedecked in Baratheon colors, from the saddle blankets to the tassels on the harnesses. It was as if fate was an old horse pulling back toward a familiar path, even as the rider tried to turn it aside. This time, Ned rode with the hunting party, his guts in knots. No words had convinced Robert to forego the hunt, and Ned felt like fate had become a fear-crazed horse that he could not rein or stop. Robert rode at the head of the procession as it traveled toward the city gates, slow enough that children ran ahead, grew bored waiting for them, and ran back. But eventually they left the city and the stench and reached the woods. Ned kept near Robert, his eyes always on the forest. He could not stop Robert from drinking, but perhaps he could kill the boar before it could reach him. "This is more like it," Robert said happily. Jon said Whalesong is a city that smells of the open forest. "How do you manage it?" "I don't," Ned said easily. "The free folk use every scrap, so there is nothing left to rot in corners, your grace. King's Landing is nothing but rot. Rot and rumor." Robert emptied his cup and held it out for his cupbearer to refill it. The lad was no more than 7 or 8 and dressed in green. Ned wondered if he was from a Reach house or one of the Crownland or Stormland houses that favored the color. But he wasn't a Lannister. The first time Ned had lived, Robert had been surrounded by gold-haired lions in red. Perhaps the rumors had caused Robert to keep more distance between himself and his wife's family, and that could only be for the good. "How is Myrcella, truly?" Robert asked. "Rob's reports suggest she is happy, and he sounds besotted with her. He tells me she is a wonderful horsewoman and brilliant with a bow and an excellent listener and wonderful with handling family and beautiful and graceful and smart and perfect in every way." Robert laughed. "She's a good girl. She deserves someone who thinks her worthy of the world." "That describes Robb," Ned said fondly. This was a pairing he favored. He would have favored it in his first life even if Myrcella had been several years younger, but Robert had been determined to put a Stark on the throne. "We'll have a grand wedding," Robert said. "Cersei will want to have it in the September here, but Myrcella is becoming a northern lady. I think we should bring the entire court north. You seem to have half their children up there already." "Those children hope to make themselves known to your children," Ned pointed out. "No, that's what their parents want. Their parents move their children about the way our parents did. The game of marriages they call it in the Red Keep. They use your good nature to find their children better matches." "Maybe," Ned admitted. "Olenna Tyrell hopes her niece will find a northern match." "Will she?" Robert asked, his curiosity making his words sharper. "Aye. She's strong and a good horsewoman. If she stops looking at my youngest daughter, some boy will catch her eye." Robert laughed. "It would serve the Queen of Thorns right if her niece refused all men." "Some do, you know. Few have the choice," Ned countered. "But even if she takes no husband, she will help the peace of the kingdom by having friends across the kingdom. I believe that is what our parents hoped for, alliances across the Vale, Stormlands and North. And they succeeded. Well enough that we unthroned the dragons," Robert said with a laugh. The lords who rode with them then crowded in, wanting their own time with the king. Ned pulled away and let them press their suits while Robert grew more and more frustrated with the politics. Hours later, they had left most of the servants behind to set up tents while the rest of them rode into the woods. Huntmasters and huntsmen rode ahead to search for prey, but Ned was growing more concerned with how often Robert called for another cup of ale. Part of Ned had hoped that the changes he had made would save his friend instead of simply postponing fate, but this hunting trip felt like the hand of some malicious god pushing them back into the familiar ruts. Robert was still a sloppy drunk struggling to stay in the saddle, and Ned feared he would, once again, die on the hunt. "Have a cup," Robert said. He urged his wine-bearer to close the distance. "I must decline," Ned said. "I am old enough that I require my wits on a hunt if I want to avoid making a fool of myself." "Nonsense," Robert said, scoffing. "Your king orders you to drink." He gestured to the wine-bearer to refill Ned's cup, and Ned allowed it. He drank, limiting himself to a mouthful of the sour ale. "Northern ales are better." "Northern ales have killed your ability to taste," Robert said. "Oh. Where is the game?" He kicked his horse, guiding it toward the huntmaster who had just appeared. Ned pulled his horse up next to Barristan. "His Grace is not feeling well." "Remain close to him and make sure he is not injured," Ned said. Barristan gave him a curious look. "His Grace has ordered us to keep a certain distance." "I cannot do more than I am right now, Lord Stark." He urged his horse forward, and Ned was left trailing behind, the cup still in his hand. He flicked the contents toward the bushes. 2 hours later, Ned was ready to demand they all return to the camp, but Robert was so deep into his cups, he would not listen. Ned even felt unsteady from the number of times Robert had pressed him to drink. Each time, Ned took only a mouthful, but the ale was unusually strong for southern drink. The Kingsguard and Huntmasters were the only ones who weren't unsteady in the saddle, and Ned would not trust Trant to protect Robert from a 6-week puppy with milk teeth. "There it is!" Robert roared. He kicked his horse, and the beast surged forward. A Huntmaster raced to Robert's side, offering a spear. Ned signaled for someone to bring him one as well, and he prepared to protect Robert from the boar that in his other life had gored the king and set in motion the events that led to war and the near destruction of the Stark line. Instead, Robert slid off the back of his horse in slow motion, his arms going up into the air, and the horse rearing as Robert jerked on the reins. Ned pulled his horse aside for fear it would step on the king or kick him, and then the whole company was in chaos. A half-dozen men lost control of their horses, and with each animal that reared, the others grew more panicked. Ned dismounted and hurried to Robert's side, using the spear that had just been pressed into his hand to thump the nose of a horse that came too near. Robert lay on the ground laughing, delighted with the chaos, although when he woke in the morning bruised from tip to stern, he would rethink that. Barristan and Trant pressed through the throng while huntsmen captured the spooked horses. "Your Grace, are you unharmed?" Trant looked at Ned with suspicion, as if he were likely to hurt the king. "I'm fine. I'm fine." Robert grinned like a madman. Trant tried to help the king up, but he fell back to the ground. "We should return to camp," Ned said. "We will when I kill something," Robert roared. Ned gripped his temper and reminded himself Robert was no longer the boy Ned could scold when his antics threatened to get them in trouble with their foster father in the Vale. "Your Grace, this southern ale has left my stomach unquiet. You may be willing to kill something, but I would prefer some quiet and my blankets and a generous bedpan." That made Robert roar with laughter. "You're old, Ned. As old as you, Your Grace. I will never get old. I'm the king. I order it such." Robert laughed more. "Then what you say must be done," Ned agreed. Trant and Barristan worked together to get Robert to his feet, but he was so deep in his cups that it took both men, and then more had to get his horse and find a mounting block because Robert was in no shape to climb on unassisted. Perhaps Robert wanted his Kingsguard to keep their distance, but Trant and Barristan had to ride on either side of him to keep him in his seat, and halfway back to camp where luxurious tents and beds and furs and silks had been laid out, Robert went from laughter to moans. Were Robert his child, Ned would make liberal use of guilt and point out that he had warned him about overindulgence. As it was, he assisted the Kingsguard in the task of returning Robert to his tent. Robert's squires, 3 boys who took charge of the king, and Ned returned to the tent he had been assigned along with a steward. Ned dismissed him and stripped out of his gamison. He thought travel and the stress of returning to King's Landing had left him off balance, but by evening, Ned knew something was drastically wrong. Most of the party who had ridden in the hunt were ill, some vomiting. Others suffering from watery stool. Yet others dizzy and unable to stand. Ned was affected less than most, but he had fallen several times trying to move from Robert's tent to the tent of the maester who had traveled with them. You must attend the king, Ned said, clinging to the tent pole. The maester was doubled over a chamber pot. I cannot. You must. He is far more affected than you. I will send a guard to King's Landing, but until others arrive, you must tend him. The maester looked up, his face slicked with sweat. I am too ill. Ned wobbled forward. You will tend your king to the best of your ability and he will survive until new maesters arrive with appropriate medicines, or I will split you open so you can study your own innards until such time as you expire, Ned threatened. He disliked issuing threats, but this stank of a Lannister plot and Ned would not allow the stags to gore him again. The maester's squire gasped, but wisely kept his silence. Ned waited until the maester stirred himself from his tent before stumbling back out. Barristan, Ned called. The king's guard watched him warily. No doubt he suspected a plot, as he should. Send a trusted man to King's Landing. Only the lords are ill. Not the squires or huntsmen. There is a plot afoot. I have already sent for assistance, Barristan whispered, catching Ned under the arm when he lost his balance and nearly tumbled to the ground. But I have done so against the king's orders. He said he was fine and he did not want his wife to have more reason to complain. Ned swallowed the bile that rose, the side effect of either whatever poison they had all ingested or horror at the thought of Lannisters riding to their aid. Tell me you have not asked for Pycelle. I have not, Barristan assured him. A lesser lord came staggering toward the king's tent, and Trant allowed the man to fall in the dirt. Go back to your tent, Lord Stark. You are more hindrance than help for now. Ned nodded and set his sights on the nearest tent pole, hoping to reach it without falling. Barristan held his arm until Ned moved away. This was a plot, and nothing Ned did could change the outcome. He was too late. Again. But this time there was no wound, no stinking infection that could not be burned out. Robert was tough and stubborn. Poison alone might fail to fell him, particularly if Pycelle could be kept away. All was not lost. But Ned knew nothing that could assist his friend now, so he climbed back in bed and clung to the edge to prevent himself from flinging himself off as the feeling of falling grew worse. Whatever poison this was, the soul who invented it should be cursed by the gods, old and new. Chapter 19. Chapter text. It took 2 days for Ned to gain his feet, but he was better than most. 4 men had died and 2 were still clinging to the edge of death. Robert was counted among the dead. Wyman came to Ned's room in the Red Keep, a small room far from the quarters of the Hand. Yone had likely assigned them when Ned's favor had been in question and Tywine had been arguing for Ned's arrest. But now Ned was happy to be far from the bustle of the main halls. My lord, Wyman said, closing the door softly. For a large man, he could still move with grace. How are you? Better than most, Ned said. My stomach still sours at the idea of food, but the dizziness has passed. Riding in a maester's wagon back to the capital while his body had been caught in a sensation of falling had been a special misery. The capital is full of accusations and unrest. The room was small enough, it had only the bed and a small bench at the end. Wyman settled on the bench and Ned remained abed. They say an incompetent brewmaster allowed the mash to sour and the poisoning was born of negligence. 2 have been hanged, their heads mounted on pikes and the workshop burned. The boys who worked there were driven away, and rumors say 3 have already shown up dead. Ned rubbed a hand over his face. Cersei's plot in his last life had depended upon luck and an aggressive boar to work. It had been fate as much as overly strong ale that had killed Robert. This plot had been more ruthless, killing bystanders and ensuring Robert's death so that no luck or fate or even the will of the gods could intervene. This had Tywine's mark. The boy king? Ned asked. He struts, my lord. No tears, no mourning for his father. He struts, and the servants whisper. Servants in this place whisper too much, Ned said. Wyman agreed. The coronation will take place in a fortnight after a period of mourning. The servants whisper it is too short a time for a son to mourn his father. Ned closed his eyes. Tywine was moving. He would have almost 3 years of molding Joffrey if he could separate Cersei from her poisonous offspring. Ned trusted he could. As much as this situation resembled the one from his last life, Tywine's involvement made the waters much more treacherous. Even with forewarning, Ned might not be able to get free of this trap. Wyman, I need your word you will follow my next orders. Of course, Lord Stark. My family has always stood with yours. Ned smiled as he remembered how the Mondalis had undermined the Boltons and tortured the Freys in that other life. You have. You are the most faithful of families. Wyman smiled. I want you to move as quietly as possible and set sail for home the moment I have an audience with Tywin Lannister. Get free of the capital as quietly as possible and sail back to White Harbor. Send word to Benjen to close the neck and send word to Winterfell to hold and follow my last orders. Wyman sucked in a breath. You expect war? I fear war, Ned corrected him. I expect men will keep their ambitions in check for a time and that time should allow the North to brace. Remind my son that I do not want men south of the neck unless they ride for a great council. Other than that, we keep our eyes to the north and wait for the hidden enemies to show. We should leave together, Wyman said. No, Ned said firmly, it is no accident that this plot has unfolded while I am here. I am Warden of the North and they think I am key to getting the North to bend the knee, but I will not be used. Make that clear to my more stubborn bannermen. Bolton, Wyman said dryly. Ned gave a weak laugh. Bolton would not march to save me. His own hide, That would motivate him, but he will not stir for me. I am more worried about the Mormonts and Umbers. Mage will feel obligated to move because it was her kin that brought me here. Wyman's expression darkened. I am most wroth with Jorah. He should have been more leal. The man's loyalty is attached to his breeches, Ned said. It had been true in 2 lifetimes now. Wyman grinned at him. His smile faded. Tywin demanded Lyonne return to the Westerlands and Jorah challenged him. The White Cloaks drove him from the throne room and he was given a sennight to get out of Westeros or face the king's executioner. Jorah's exile was another familiar path, but the White Cloaks taking an interest was not. The White Cloaks moved to protect Tywin. Tywin is the new hand of the king with Cersei as regent, but the rumor is that she is in deep mourning and will not or cannot leave her rooms. Bronze Yohn. Dismissed with fanfare and honors, Wyman said. Fate strained to return to familiar ruts in the road, and Ned's stomach soured more. If he was fated to die in King's Landing, he would die better this time. He remembered the voices in the void, the ones that asked if he would sacrifice his soul for his children. He did not regret the choice he'd made, but he wondered what would wait for him after death this time. Will you pledge the North to the service of King Joffrey? Wyman asked, his voice a breath of a whisper. In these halls, one could not trust the walls themselves with a secret. Ned thought through his options. If he openly confronted the Lannisters, it would not end well, and a precipitous move on their part might spur Robb into action. However, Tywin was likely to respect Ned's value as a hostage where the less intelligent members of his family never had. I will swear the North to the legitimate and rightful son of Robert Baratheon, he finally said. He kept his own voice low even though what he was saying was, on the surface, perfectly proper. Wyman's eyes widened, and he moved a step closer. Let me leave guards with you, my lord. No, Ned said firmly. Every man of the North needs to be in the North. If Tywin means to treat with me fairly, royal guards will escort me back to Whale Song just as they escorted me here. If he means to act dishonorably, a few northern lives thrown away in my defense will mean nothing. You have your orders. Wyman pressed his lips together and seemed to fight with himself over that order. Eventually he leaned in and whispered, and what of the rumors? Does your vow hold the North? Ned stood, pausing as his vision grayed for a moment. Then he urged Wyman to move toward the outer wall of the room. This place was so far from the central areas of the keep that he didn't think there were hidden passages, but the exterior wall was the only place he could absolutely trust to be free of listeners. Even so, his words were little more than soft breath that Wyman had to strain to hear. This cannot be spoken of, not unless war is declared. I will keep your words in confidence, swearing Willis and Wendell to do the same until your conditions are met. They were a good house, leal and true. Marndaelis had died with Robb at that cursed wedding, and still the family that survived had undermined the Lannisters and Boltons at every opportunity. They had taken revenge on Freys when other houses cowered. They might laugh more than other northerners, but they had northern ice in their blood. I asked Robert if his wife was true, Ned admitted. Wyman sucked in a startled breath. He said he allowed no man to be alone with Cersei unless he was family. She was disappointed with Myrcilla's looks, but then she was most in the company of her uncle Tiget. When she grew large with Joffrey and Tiget spent time with her, Robert hoped the man would teach Cersei some discretion and respect. Then he died of the pox. Wyman grimaced. Her own uncle. Given that her brother had fathered all 3 children in his last lifetime, Ned was neither as shocked or as horrified as Wyman. After that, she went many years without growing heavy with child. Her nephew Lancel was a great comfort to her in those years. Wyman's grimace grew deeper. To sleep with an uncle was unwise and distasteful, but Lancel had been little more than a child, and Cersei had led him to commit treason against the king. Lord Stark, Wyman looked away, clearly struggling with his words. I will do my best to return to the north, Ned said, but I am descended from the kings of winter. We have an obligation to serve the north, no matter where that takes us. I am as chained to my obligations as you are chained to follow the order of your liege lord. There is no one I would rather serve, Lord Stark, Wyman said, uncharacteristically serious. Then serve me well. I am going to seek to send a raven telling Winterfell that I will stay for Robert's funeral before hiring a ship to take me north. I suspect Tywin will want to discuss the content of my message, and that will be your opportunity to move. So go, prepare your household to move silently. Any property you abandon, House Stark will replace. Wyman took a step backward and studied Ned, his expression conflicted, but then he gave a small bow. Yes, my lord. Safe travels, and may the gods, old and new, guard your path. The old gods have set me on this path, and I trust them to see me to the end that will protect my family. At least this time, Ned had no children in the capital. Sansa would not be tortured by grown men. Arya would not be starved and driven to the faceless men. The world might seek the old familiar ruts of his last life, but it could not repeat the same horrors. That was a price worth both his life and his soul. Wyman left, and Ned looked at the view of servants beating carpets out his window. He didn't know where his life was leading, but his family was safe. Robb was much more aware of the dangers both to the north and the south. He'd been warned to keep Starks away from the wall and to distrust Greenseers because something was corrupting them. Robb had a betrothal to a true woman, and Sansa would be married to a man, not for his political power but because of the strength of his personality, his honor, and his arm. In 2 lifetimes, Darin Hornwood had shown himself true, and Ned had given Robb the plans he had made to raise up the family by using the Broken Branch to irrigate significant rye and barley fields. Winterfell would pay for the upgrades as part of Sansa's dowry, but the true treasure, as far as Ned was concerned, was that his daughter would be with a true man who would respect her. No, his family was not in the same danger. If this was the price of his life, he would gladly pay it. Ned waited several hours before wandering out of his rooms and walking the familiar path to the Ravenry. The poison had not left his system yet, and he had to stop on the stairs several times. Guards in Lannister Red watched him, but no one attempted to interfere as he moved toward the tower. The dizziness had returned by the time he reached Pycelle's realm. A boy ran up the last few steps past Ned, so he was not surprised when Pycelle appeared, his chains clinking. Lord Stark, you should not be out of your bed. Ned breathed through his nose and leaned against the wall for support. I had thought the dizziness had passed. It appeared I overestimated my strength. It galled him to say as much, but it was truth, and Pycelle could easily see it. Sweat beaded on Ned's forehead, and he clung to the wall as the world swam in and out of focus. Come, let us get you to a seat. Instead of helping Ned, he gestured for several boys to support Ned up the last few steps and into a well-appointed room. Ned sat on the couch and tried to convince his stomach he was not aboard ship during a storm. I need to send a raven, Ned said, but I am unable to write the message. Can I impose upon you to do it for me? Ned asked. Of course, my lord. Sending ravens is my duty. Pycelle putted about the room, gathering quill and parchment before settling behind an ornate desk. What would you like to say? It is for Winterfell, Ned said. He must bait this hook well. I will remain for King Robert's funeral and seek passage north on a ship only after. He could fit no more on a raven scroll. That should convince Tywin that he was not too intractable to be useful. I will see it sent, Lord Stark. It is a terrible thing, the king's death, He was in the prime of life. Robert had drank and eaten and whored until he little resembled the demon on the trident, but Ned didn't argue with Pycelle. The man was a servant of the Lannisters and had no real power of his own. He could only parrot what Tywine said. "Come, let the boys assist you back to your room," he said, and Ned cooperated when two lads who had to be at least 10 and 5 helped him to his feet. Truth be told, Ned was not sure he would have made the trip down the stairs without tumbling the whole way, so the boys were a great help. It also allowed him to catch his breath by letting the boys carry much of his weight. He needed to recover before dealing with Tywine. And sure enough, Tywine stood waiting when they reached the level where the public audiences took place. There were 2 smaller rooms and then the throne room along with a dozen offices where Ned had set tax collectors to work during his time as Hand. He didn't know who was in those rooms now. "Lord Stark, I had not thought you would be out of bed. None of the other victims has been able to rise yet. I needed to tell my lady wife that I would remain for Robert's funeral, Lord Lannister. I had thought you were anxious to return to the north." Ned stopped, his hand braced on the wall as he waved off the boys with his other hand. They both hurried away with unseemly speed. "Robert was my oldest and truest friend. I will honor him. Will his bones be laid to rest here or at Storm's End?" He had expressed no preference, and Queen Cersei would have him buried here, Tywine said. Symbolically, that was the logical move. The Targaryens had built King's Landing and the royal family were all buried in the Red Keep, so putting Robert to rest here signaled that he was the legitimate inheritor of the Targaryen Empire and by conquest he was. But the Baratheon rule now had a serious crisis. Ned nodded slowly. "Lord Wyman told me you had taken the role of Hand. Did he speak true or are my brains still addled from the poison?" Tywine started to move toward the throne room, and Ned followed slowly, shuffling his feet to slow them. Every second Tywine's attention was on him was one more second Wyman had to escape with his household. It forced Tywine to walk slower to stay at Ned's side. "I have taken the role to advise King Joffrey. Not Regent." Tywine stopped, allowing Ned to catch up. "A few argue for Stannis to act as Regent, but King Joffrey has chosen his mother as Regent." Ned nodded. "Where are Lords Stannis and Renly? I would offer them my condolences on the loss of their brother." Tywine started walking again once Ned caught up. "They have returned to their respective keeps to mourn with their people." Both had already been gone when Ned had been called before the small council, but he did not challenge Tywine. The first time he had lived this life, he'd been an absolute fool to put his trust in truth. Truth, like words, was nothing more than air. It was no defense from hard steel. "I shall pay my respects to them at the funeral," then Ned said. Tywine seemed to relax, so Ned must be doing a good job of playing ignorant. They reached the throne room, and Joffrey was sitting on the throne, his gold crown canted forward. It made him look a fool, but from the way he lounged in the chair, he thought himself grand. Ned had made a much better marriage deal this time, Myrcella instead of Joffrey. "King Joffrey," Ned said. He bowed his head, and then made a production out of stumbling. He caught Tywine's arm, and nearly pulled the other man over before he righted himself. "I apologize, Your Grace," Ned said, "but I fear if I try to take a knee, I will fall over. The poison has not left my blood and Pycelle wished me to stay abed, but I needed to tell my lady wife that I would remain for King Robert's funeral. A greater warrior or better friend this realm has never known." Ned tried to chart a path between flattery and northern bluntness. "It's fine." Joffrey waved his hand in a gesture that was likely meant to be magnanimous, but at 13, he only looked like a child mocking his betters. "The guards say you leapt to my father's side when he fell from his horse and threatened to split the maester open and make him study his own innards if he didn't treat my father." Joffrey's eyes brightened as he spoke the last half. "I did, Your Grace," Ned said. "I hoped to save his grace. King Robert was such a great man that I cannot conceive of a world where poisoned hop took him from us. In the Greyjoy Rebellion, I saw him kill 4 men with one swing of his hammer when they tried to board the ship. The King's Guard were like unschooled boys next to him, all but Barristan. We dismissed him," Joffrey said. "You tried to save my father, but Barristan didn't even notice that the ale had gone bad." Ned blinked, not sure what to say. He wondered if Barristan would go searching for Daenerys this time, and why Joffrey would blame Barristan for the poison. He was not the royal taster or the Almaster. It was a foolish move to dismiss Barristan, and Ned would have thought Tywine would put an end to it. Then again, Barristan was a Kingsguard, sworn to hold his king's secrets. Perhaps they feared that he knew too much or had seen something that would call Joffrey's legitimacy into question. If so, Ned hoped that Barristan knew to hide. I have many tales to tell of King Robert. He loved to tell of the battles at Summerhall. A leal man brought word that Lords Grandison, Caffin and Fell planned to join forces and march against your father. Instead of waiting for the battle to come to him, staying behind the strong walls of Storm's End, which he had come to provision for a siege, instead he rode out. He attacked three forces, one at a time, before they could unite. 3 battles in one day, and he was there, swinging his hammer at the front each time. Ned told of the battles as Robert had loved to tell them, which meant that Ned did not know how much truth there was in them. He did know that Joffrey clung to each word, leaning forward in his seat and breathing hard when Ned described the battle and blood in detail. Glorifying violence sickened Ned, but he needed to give women time to sail, so he offered far more detail that was his wont. When he ended with the tale of how Lords Caffin and Grandison along with Lord Fell's son Silverexu became 3 of the most loyal bannermen because of Robert's mercy after the battle, Ned lost Joffrey's attention. Before Ned could begin another story, Tywine spoke. "Since you are here," Tywine said, "it is proper for the North to give its vows to the new king." "Of course," Ned said easily. "Your Grace," Ned said, bowing his head again but without taking a knee. "The North vows its allegiance, its banners, and its support to the true-born son of Robert Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Lord of the 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm." From the way Joffrey preened, he didn't notice that Ned had attached all honors to Robert, who had been the rightful king of the 7 kingdoms. He never called Joffrey the true king, yet he had bent the knee enough that Tywine could not draw attention to the omission without drawing others' notice and fueling the rumors. And he could not demand another vow for fear of making it seem this vow was invalid. Ned did not like playing politics and he was quite a poor player, but he had planned this for a number of years. Joffrey was pleased, but Tywine's smile was thin. "Lord Stark, your current room is so far from the main halls that it will make recovery more difficult. You should be closer to the Maesters. Come, let us find you more appropriate quarters." "Thank you, Lord Hand," Ned said. He could only hope the quarters were not in the Black Cells. Chapter 20, The Lannister Brothers Flirt with Treason. Chapter text. Jaime nearly knocked Tyrion over as he hurried around the corner. "And here I thought you were the one sibling I had who didn't want me dead," Tyrion said as he pushed off the wall he had stumbled into. "I'm sorry," Jaime said. He would have apologized more, but Tyrion waved him off. "Clearly some emergency has happened. Either that or you have eaten Benjen's jerky and urgently need a privy." Jaime glared at his brother. "This is not a time for jests." "It is always a time for jests." Tyrion studied Jaime like he was a bug to be dissected or a hole to be inspected. Jaime did not have time for his hardness. "Benjen has received word. Lord Stark is not to be allowed to leave the Red Keep and Lord Wyman has fled, resigning his post as Master of Ships by Raven." The smile melted off Tyrion's face. "Baratheon is dead," he said, although Jaime didn't know how he'd jumped to that conclusion. "I imagine Father is riding for the Red Keep as we speak. Cersei is there alone, and Joffrey is not yet a man with enough years to hold the crown, which might explain why they are holding Lord Stark. Cersei had always been ruled by fear and greed more than common sense. Holding Lord Stark made no sense unless she was expecting the North to come marching down to take the capital from her. Ned Stark didn't care enough about the South to bother." Tyrion rubbed a hand over his face. "This is another fine mess our beloved sister has engineered." Jaime snorted. "She didn't engineer anything. Word from the capital is that a batch of poorly made pies or mead poisoned an entire hunting group. The king is not the only one to die." Fear had not gripped Jaime this firmly since he'd been on the road and the sellswords his father had hired told them what they would do to Tyrion if he did not surrender. He'd felt so helpless, and his brother had been a child of 13 then. He had the same feeling now, but he didn't know how to fix it. He couldn't kill all the sellswords and sneak into the Rock to kidnap his brother. He didn't know what to do, so he focused on following Benjen's orders. Poison only means she is willing to kill innocents to target her victim. Tyrion fell in beside Jaime as he walked toward the soldiers' quarters. You are making assumptions. Jaime kept his voice low. He felt as though the wrong word would set off an explosion, and the idea of Jon and Arthur being out there, blind, vulnerable. His stomach soured. Tyrion snorted. A healthy king with another 40 years of life drops dead 3 years before the prince is of age, leaving Cersei to guide the sadistic young man. That feels less like an assumption and more like a logical conclusion. You always see the worst in Cersei. I see the truth. You see what you hope she will be. Jaime didn't answer. He had cut Cersei off as surely as he had cut off his father. They were too aligned in their goals, and Jaime had chosen to protect Tyrion and his own sanity by fleeing the reach of either. But he did still have feelings for Cersei. Not fond feelings, but something adjacent to that emotion. True, those feelings were stained with his shame for lying with her when they'd been standing on the precipice of adulthood, and fury that she had slept with Lancel, who was no more than a child. He felt contempt when he thought of what she had done, but he still remembered a little girl who had cried when their father had denied her the right to train in the yard. If Tywin Lannister had taken the same stance as Lord Tarth, how different would she be? They reached the barracks, and Jaime opened the door to see most of the soldiers he'd been training engaged in betting games or drinking strong northern ale. King Baratheon has died, he announced without fanfare. Castle Lyanna will observe a time of mourning for the Seven Kingdoms, so Lord Benjen Stark requests that you return to your lords and lands. He will return a portion of gold to each of your lords to apologize for ending the training early. Several of the men had shot to their feet before Jaime even finished. Was it the thrice-cursed Ironborn? We'll kill every man, woman, and child on that isle and end their cursed god forever, one shouted. It was, apparently, thrice-cursed Mead or Tyrion said with a nonchalance that made several of the men bristle at the disrespect. He was our good brother, and we mourn his passing, Jaime quickly said before heightened emotions could lead to violence. We received word that poorly preserved food led to several men in a hunting party being laid low. King Baratheon is not the only casualty. Tyrion, however, did not know how to avoid aggravating men. Killed by his food and ale. A terrible fate for a man who loved food, ale, wine, and women. He was a man after my own heart, and I can only hope that if my ale is to kill me, too, that it wait until I am much older. He died before his time. Tyrion rested his hand against his heart as he spoke with exaggerated emotion. Jaime sometimes wondered why he put up with his brother. The little shitstain caused more trouble than he could talk his way out of. Even now, men were bristling. We all mourn my good brother, which is why Lord Benjen asks you all to return to your homes. By nightfall, we hope to close our gates. Food and rations are available at the stables to ease your travels. Jaime caught Tyrion by the shoulder and propelled him out of the room. Word would travel among the men, so Jaime did not worry about those who had not been in the common hall. He had one warrior, though, who would never learn of this unless he found her himself. You didn't have to do that, Jaime hissed once they had gotten far enough away to avoid being overheard. I didn't have to, but I enjoyed doing it. They want to turn Robert Baratheon into a paragon of virtue, the warrior reborn. We've all heard the rumors, and seen the tax records. He was a man with as many flaws as I, and that means far more flaws than most. As a monster, I can recognize another monster when I read of him in scrolls. Jaime clenched his jaw for a moment and tried to rein in his temper. As much as he loved Tyrion, the man had too few gentle instincts. He was not even gentle with himself, which never failed to annoy Jaime. You are not a monster, and he was king. He was a lecher, Tyrion argued. A flaw that did not impact his ability to rule. Most kings are lechers. Jaime had too many memories of Aerys and his strange excitement after seeing men burn to believe otherwise. All men were terrible, some simply gathered enough power to act in despicable ways and not suffer consequences. Tyrion was not impressed with Jaime's argument. Most don't fritter away the tax base and leave the kingdom in debt. Too bad he didn't declare war on the Reach instead of the Iron Islands. Then he could have paid off those debts. Jaime gritted his teeth. While correct about the facts of the issue, Tyrion should not be speaking so irreverently of it. Unfortunately, Tyrion knew little but irreverence. Hopefully someone clears the debt before the true king can step into the role. Tyrion. Jaime hissed, horror coloring his words. Tyrion looked up at him. I am, of course, speaking of our nephew Joffrey and my hopes that Cersei will clear the debt before her son can rule without regent. He smiled and blinked with exaggerated innocence and was, in short, infuriating. Jaime took a deep breath and buried his frustration. If he reacted, then any eavesdropper would know there was more to this story than either of them had said. I am sure father will move to the Red Keep and ensure that Cersei does not beggar the realm with her silks and lace. Never before have I been grateful for father, Tyrion said. I'm sure others will be equally grateful if he can straighten out the books. Now that a Lannister is king, perhaps father can even forgive the crown's debt. That would be a wonderful way to start a new reign as king. Jaime walked faster, leaving Tyrion to scramble in his wake. Maybe Tyrion's wit was sharp enough to cut, but his legs were still short enough to leave him short of breath, and without breath, he could form no words. Benjen had put Lady Brienne at the opposite end of the castle, so Tyrion was audibly panting before Jaime knocked on her door. You are a petty man, Tyrion wheezed before he leaned against the wall. I use my advantages well, Jaime countered. Before they could descend into bickering, the door opened. Lady Brienne stood in a simple coat buttoned in front, but instead of showing a chemise below, she had on a man's breeches. It was such an odd combination of men's and women's clothing that it caught Jaime off guard. He had grown used to seeing her in armor, and on the training field, he had no problem seeing her as a man. But the embroidered coat was not mannish in any form. Jaime cleared his throat. Lady Brienne, I had hoped to speak to you. Sir Jaime. Her voice was perfectly respectful, but he still got the impression that she was suspicious. I believe it has come time for you to return to Tarth. That startled her. Have I offended you? Other than challenging him in ways that were a constant annoyance, she had not. King Baratheon has died. We have word that Lord Stark is unable to return. Wyman Martindale has returned to White Harbor. Castle Lyanna will observe a time of mourning. This is not any offense you have given. He blurted the words out, afraid to show any emotion at all for fear that his true thoughts would be evident. He had no talent with lying or keeping secrets, and his secrets were fuel that might set the kingdom on fire if he were not careful. Brienne raised her chin. I respect that you would wish to mourn. I know the king was your good brother, but I would choose to remain in the castle during this period. Jaime's aggravation rose. Why couldn't she accept his command? She did on the training field. 7 hells, she listened better and improved more than any man on the field. But now she had a stubborn tilt to her jaw. Tyrion intervened. I think my brother is worried that the realm may turn unstable and it is best to leave for home now before rumors and ravens reach the far corners of the realm. Rumors? What rumors? Brienne projected a mild alarm, her body stiffening, and her hand going to her waist even though her sword was not buckled in place. Jaime sucked in a breath, but Tyrion answered before Jaime could think of an appropriate response. It was hardly a surprise that Tyrion thought faster than he did. My lady, you must be the only one in the kingdom who has not heard rumors. Her face turned to stone. I assure you that few wish to share any conversation with me, much less speak to me for pleasure. Tyrion grinned and pushed past her, straight into her private quarters. Then let me be the first. Tyrion. Jaime hissed, horrified at his brother's actions, and Brienne seemed equally nonplussed. Get in here so we won't be overheard, Tyrion said, which were the most terrifying words in the 7 kingdoms. As though pulled by strings, Jaime followed his brother, even against his will. He had never been in Brienne's room before, and it was far more womanly than he had expected. There was embroidery in a hoop sitting by the window and embroidered pillows, although Jaime didn't know if she had brought those covers or if the women working at Castle Lyanna thought it proper. Either way, Jaime would have expected her to have tossed such womanly artifacts into a corner. Maybe even spat or pissed on them. This is most improper, Brienne said, and Jaime opened his mouth to agree, but as usual, Tyrion found words first. Improper other things said about my nephew, the soon-to-be crowned king of the 7 kingdoms. Why, there are whispers that he is a bastard, born of another Lannister. Can you believe that? Tyrion demanded in a horrified voice that almost convinced Jaime. Brian didn't look fooled, though. Tyrion continued. Slander. Lies. Inconceivable tales of incest and horror. The throne always attracts such envious whispers. After all, look what they said about good King Aerys. Brian's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Exactly. Tyrion said triumphantly as he pointed a stubby finger at her. Your brother is quite mad, Brian said in a concerned tone. Trust me, I know, Jaime admitted wearily. Tyrion scoffed. Even worse are those ruffians, those ignorers of law and tradition who would put Stannis on the throne. Stannis the Manus, they call him, although if he married a Florent, I imagine he has a right to show other women what sort of manhood he has. They are not a family known for their looks. So if he flaunts his manhood outside his marriage bed, I salute him. Brian turned red upon an instant. And then. Why, I heard tell that some in the Stormlands say that Storm's End is the seat of the Baratheon prince just as Dragonstone was the seat of the Targaryen heir. They claim that Robert bypassed Stannis by appointing Renly the Lord of Storm's End. They say that if the rumors and lies and slander surrounding Joffrey and Tommen are truth, then Renly is the proper choice for king. So many idiots, all making ridiculous claims. Tyrion paused dramatically before giving Brian a long look. And the most ridiculous of all is that Joffrey or Tommen are Lannister and not Baratheon. One only need to look at them to see the truth. Jaime was dying. To say even this much was high treason, and Tyrion was putting himself and Jaime and Castle Lionel at risk with this stunt. Brian grabbed the end of her bedpost and sat. Such rumors fly. Lies. Slander. Tyrion waved his hand dismissively. So many fools believe words that would get them sent to the block and their heads displayed over King's Landing on a spike. But men are fools, and rumors of discontent spread. I have no doubt Lord Stark remains in the Red Keep to quell such foolishness, not as some say as a hostage against the North's good behavior and the surrender of Myrcella and Tommen. Jaime rubbed a hand over his face. His brother was an idiot. And Jaime had not said even half that. Tyrion was pulling rumors out of the ether. Or making them up from the gases that passed from his ass. I see, Brian said slowly. And what say the North to these treasonous slanders? Jaime sighed. Tyrion had already forced them into a corner, so it was no loss to tell her what Benjen and Robb Stark would soon announce to all the Lords Paramount. The North understands that some have questions regarding the line of succession, and the only proper solution is a great council where each may state their case. Brian looked surprised. That is honorable. Did you expect something less than honor from the North? Northmen eat and drink honor with their ale, Tyrion said. Unless they are away from home. Then I fear the last war left many a northern bastard carrying a southern name. War brings out the worst in men, which is why we encourage people to travel soon before rumors drive men onto the roads. You cannot expect honor from anyone during such storms. Brian's expression darkened. I do not expect any part of the realm to cleave to honor when it conflicts with self-interest. That is a uniquely pessimistic view, Tyrion said, and he looked truly surprised. It is realistic, and I must be a realist to survive in a world that has no place for me, Brian said plainly. Even Tyrion seemed too caught off guard to respond. She stripped off her coat and picked up a manly tunic before walking toward the door. I must speak with Lord Benjen. Jaime retreated from her path, allowing her to leave while he and Tyrion were still in her room. With her gone, it felt even more improper because it was even more obvious that this was the chamber of a lady. She is quite remarkable, Tyrion said. From him, that was high praise. Out, Jaime said, his hand on the door. We should not be in a lady's chamber. I don't think I've ever before heard you speak of her as a lady. I call her Lady Brian. With the same tone you used to call me a shit-stain, Tyrion said as he left the chamber. Jaime followed and closed the door to Lady Brian's chamber. Chapter 21. Chapter text. What was your opinion of the flying dragon? Lord Willis asked Tommen. Lord Willis was a large man with heavy jowls and a large smile, but people told her that his girth was nothing compared to his father, Lord Wyman, who was the master of coin in King's Landing. Willis loved talking about his father, and Myrcella could feel the affection Willis had for his family. It made her sad in the same way she grew sad watching the Starks. She and Tommen never had a family that cared for each other that way. She could look forward to marrying Rob and building a loving family, but she worried for Tommen. He wrinkled his nose and seemed to think for a long time. Myrcella wondered if he had always seemed like a quiet child only because no one gave him time to collect his thoughts. He was nothing like their father who spoke without thinking, and Myrcella thought that a good thing. I am surprised they fly a banner with a dragon on it, Tommen said. He looked at Willis like he was expecting to be chastised. Even after all these weeks in White Harbor and before that, a year at Winterfell, he still expected to be told he was wrong. Myrcella exchanged a look with Sir Bywater, who seemed just as sad at her brother's hesitance. I assume your father the king has read his